Hello and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your not-so-daily dose of the latest news, rumours and speculation about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. The day is Wednesday, May 22nd, and I'm your host Harry. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are in the world. It is so lovely to bring you a second episode this month, something that I truly haven't been able to say for a while. And whilst on the last episode I said that we were back, now we are truly back. And that's because last week, on Tuesday, May 14th, we received our first teaser trailer for Season 2 of The Rings of Power. But that wasn't all we got, because a few hours later, we also received a behind-the-scenes video, which offered even more of a sneak peek into the upcoming season. So even though it has only been a few weeks since we discussed our hopes for Season 2, and despite the fact we spent 3 hours discussing the trailer on a Twitter space, I knew that I could only discuss this trailer with one person. And after many days of rescheduling and recording across different nights, I returned to you with over 3 hours of discussion featuring your favourite co-host, Anna Lasar. But before we dive into the conversation, we must as always begin with a reading from the Professor's work. Today's reading comes from the Silmarillion, of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly, and few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon bidding them beware. For Sauron took to himself the name of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship. And he said to them, Alas for the weakness of the great, for a mighty king is Gil-galad, and wise in all lore is Master Elrond, and yet they will not aid me in my labours. Can it be that they do not desire to see other lands become as blissful as their own? But wherefore should Middle-earth remain for ever desolate and dark, whereas the elves could make it as fair as Eregion, nay, even as Valinor? And since you have not returned thither, as you might, I perceive that you love this Middle-earth, as do I. Is it not then our task to labour together for its enrichment, and for the raising of all the elven kindreds that wander here, untaught to the height of that power and knowledge which those have who are beyond the sea? Now that we have seen our first glimpse of Season 2, and, more importantly, our first glimpse of a certain Lord of Gifts, I knew that this was the perfect reading to begin our episode with. But, with that reading done, I shall not waste a single more moment of your time. Let's get into our discussion of the Season 2 trailer with Anna. And once again, after not quite as long a break as last time, I am delighted to welcome back to the podcast my good friend Anna. Anna, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Harry. Thank you for having me back. I think that might be the first time you've ever described me as a good friend, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've only had to do about 12 episodes of this before I'll grudgingly admit it.
I know. I mean, like you said, it's less time has passed. It's not been quite 18 months. I feel, you know what? We did quite well in predicting when the trailer was going to come out. I mean, we released this episode and a few days later, we had a trailer and behind-the-scenes footage for Season 2.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take any credit, and, I think as people gathered, I had a bit of a hint that it was coming, although I'll have full transparency with the listeners. The date I was told the trailer was coming was much later in May, and so I kind of thought, I'll release this podcast, we'll get a couple of weeks of, relaxing, getting people excited, and then the trailer will release, and I think we released it on the Saturday or Sunday, and then Monday we got the announcement. And the funny thing about that was I'd been staying at family for a couple of weeks, and I drove back up to Manchester on Monday, and I'd literally got out the car, got back into the flat, started unpacking my stuff, was talking to my dad, and then my phone buzzed because I have notifications on. And so for about 2 minutes, I just said, "Sorry, Dad, I've got to deal with this," and had to put together a tweet being like, "We're so back."
I mean, yeah, I did the exact same because thankfully I'm quite glad we got I think it was maybe like a day's notice, like a 24-hour countdown that the trailer was coming out. And I was like, oh, great. Oh, actually, no, you might have been right. I think it was the Tuesday it came out.
Yeah.
Because I remember I had the Monday off work, got the news that it was coming out on the Tuesday, and I was like, I should have just taken the Tuesday off work. What an idiot. So I did take a coffee break at my job the next day solely to go downstairs and watch the trailer. That's where kind of the majority of my tweets came from. I was kind of sat downstairs with my coffee like, oh my God, we're so back. Rings of Power season 2. And then I had to go back, snap back into kind of my corporate mode. But the whole time, the whole rest of the day, I was just thinking like, Annatar, 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 Annatar. And it was a hard thing to balance that day.
I think two things. One, I think our followers will love the idea of corporate Anna, because I think those of them who don't know, you're like, this person who tweets about Aragorn for the last 4 years, that they've got a corporate side to them. That's mad.
She has a real job.
And the second part of it is, I think, like, you and so many other people, obviously, you knew when the trailer was coming out, but you couldn't adjust, your day-to-day life. So I know one of our good friends, May, I think she was at work, couldn't watch it. I know other people watching it, like, in the bathrooms at their work. Everyone was just trying what they could. Yeah. I mean, we will get on to talking about the trailer, I promise. But it certainly says something that in less than a week, what is it, 5 days, 6 days since the trailer's been released, it's now over 10 million views. I mean, insane.
Yeah, I was looking at that before. I mean, someone posted something the other day that said 8 million views, and I had to go and check because I was like, what? Like, seriously? And yeah, we're already on 10 million. I mean, it's quite funny for the people who say that the Rings of Power has no impact. I mean,
I know.
Just look at the numbers.
Strange, isn't it?
The funny thing is you can kind of go two ways with that argument. People will say the Rings of Power has no impact. You'll tell them the trailer has 10 million views. So they'll say, well, most of those views were probably hate watchers. And you know what? Just stop bringing people to hate watch it then. Stop caring about it and stop tweeting about it. And then we won't have any receipts to say that 10 million people have watched our trailer.
I know it's a fairly self-defeating strategy when their idea is, oh, you know what? I'm just going to watch it and leave comments on it. And the thing they go is, oh, if you look in the comment section, it's all people roasting it. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you're aware how social media algorithms work. Yeah. It doesn't really matter what you comment. All that's doing it is bumping it up the algorithm. So I do find it very funny that this whole kind of culture war YouTube grifter industry that's built up around fantasy media and popular intellectual property, they've been doing this a decade now, I feel like, from Star Wars to Marvel to whatever, and yet they still don't really understand that the more they talk about it, the better it does for the thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you know what? They're never going to learn, so there's no point in even kind of telling them anymore. But you know what? 10 million views and counting. We're doing great.
Yeah, and this will be the last thing I'll say about them, because then we'll get on to talk about the thing we do like. But I did find it funny that I saw one of them had posted a YouTube video, and it said something like, oh, Rings of Power changes course. So basically trying to say, oh, the first season was so bad that now they're doing something completely different. And I'm like, I know exactly what's happened with this person. They've seen the trailer for season 2. They've actually got quite excited about it, and they're like, oh, I can't say I'm excited about it, so I'm going to say, no, we were right about the first season, and now they've listened to us, and it's going to be unwoke.
You know what? I saw something quite similar the other day. It was on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was that tweeted it. And listen, if you didn't enjoy season 1, that's fine. However, I saw someone's reaction to the season 2 trailer, and it was, wow, I wish season 1 had been good so I could be excited about season 2. It's like, how do you have that attitude towards things? I don't understand.
I know, it's a mystery. But luckily, listeners, you have two people here who both enjoyed season 1, very much looking forward to season 2, and are now prepared to talk about both the trailer, the teaser video. Spoiler for anyone who's listening to this, Anna and I are going to be recording this in 2 parts. So we planned on recording this all in one go, but our schedules, as you might have known from Twitter, have been a bit all over the place. So we're going to try and get through as much as we can tonight, which is Sunday night. Then we're probably going to try and do some more Monday. So hopefully, and I can edit this out if I'm wrong, but hopefully this is coming to you around Tuesday, Wednesday this coming week. But we appreciate your patience. We know we're later than everyone else, but neither of us are actually influencers. We're just 2 idiots.
Yeah, listen, we don't get anything from this except the pure joy of yapping to each other about the Rings of Power.
Yeah, and that doesn't pay anything.
No.
Okay, right. Before we get into the details of the trailer, and obviously we're going to have a discussion about everything that was in the trailer, and then like Anna said at the start, we also got the behind-the-scenes video about, I think it was about 2 hours later. So we're going to talk about all the different plot lines concurrently. So if there was something in the behind-the-scenes video, we'll talk about it. If there's something in the trailer, we'll talk about it. And we'll try and reference when we're discussing the separate things. But by and large, we're going to go through this as we did for those of you who listened to our Season 2 Hopes episode. We're going to go plot by plot. But before we get into all that, Anna, I guess I should just ask you, Tuesday, you were escaping from corporate Anna, and you were going to watch the trailer. Talk to me about what your initial reaction was to the trailer and how you feel about it a few days later. What was your overall impression?
Not to go back to the people we mentioned before, but I think there is a very clear reason why there's this shift in opinions all of a sudden. And it is because I wholeheartedly think that at least the first trailer that we've got for season 2 is a lot stronger than at least maybe the first trailer that we got for season 1. And I think that it's very clear that the kind of show in general and the showrunners have found their footing now. They introduced us to Middle-earth in season 1, and now they know exactly what story they want to tell with season 2. And it feels like a lot more confident in that way. The moment I kind of went into the trailer was just like, as you said before, we're so back. And the first thing I noticed was just kind of how dark it was compared to season 1. Maybe it's just this trailer, the whole season might not have that same kind of vibe, but the general vibe of this trailer was just darkness, and you can feel their kind of shift from this maybe hopeful tone of season 1 of, we're going to defeat Sauron and everything will be fine, into this season 2 of Sauron's technically won at least one of his battles, and this is the season where he's going to kind of rise, and we're going to see the Rings of Power forged. Whether we'll see the One Ring, I'm not too sure yet. I would absolutely love it if we did. But this is his season, We've got Charlie as Annatar, and the moment that I saw that, there were so many mixed feelings, I mean, everyone knows how I felt about Halbrand in season 1. That is absolutely no secret. He is my worst enemy. I'm his number 100,000th fan. I dislike him as a character. However, when I saw Charlie as Annatar, I was kind of expecting to be like, oh God, here we go again. But that wasn't how I felt. I was very kind of, okay, they've gone with this. They've gone with the same cast. They're just kind of switching up how he looks. But it really impressed me. And I've seen a lot of people talk about like, oh no, they're kind of doing this whole, he puts a wig on and no one's going to recognize him. And we'll get into this in our kind of Eregion discussion. One, I don't think they're going to go down that kind of thing of, oh, he's literally just got a wig on and that's why no one knows who he is. And 2, even if they did, I think from what we saw of Charlie in the trailer, that wouldn't be too far-fetched. I mean, his entire physicality has changed, and it's not just because of the wig and the ears. The way he is playing Sauron has completely changed. And I think, we got a glimpse of that at the end of season 1 when he just has this moment where he just snaps into Sauron. He goes from Halbrand to Sauron, and he does it kind of masterfully. I think that's really good. I mean, I'm really happy with who they centered in this trailer. We've got Celebrimbor, Annatar. That was exactly what I wanted. We said in the season 2 Hopes podcast, what we wanted was a more of a focused look on Celebrimbor. And I feel like we got that. We have a glimpse of what I think might be the final stand between himself and Annatar in Eregion, which is going to be heartbreaking and absolutely devastating.
Anna, just to cut you off for a second, I just asked you what your overall thoughts were on the trailer.
Listen, I'm getting there. Okay. I'm just very
You're
excited.
spoiling yourself. You're spoiling yourself.
I'm just very excited about Celebrimbor, okay?
Okay, that's allowed then.
But yeah, you have this ended of the plot line of them in Eregion, which again, very exciting. But sorry, Harry, I'll move on from Eregion. Thank you. As per request. But yeah, I mean, the one thing I was kind of most excited for in the trailer was to see Elendil. He's my favorite. He was my favorite in season one. We only got one shot of him, which was a little bit disappointing, but maybe it's because I'm a little bit too obsessed with him. But I've bounced a lot of theories off of that one shot. We got some more from the behind the scenes footage of him, so I'm kind of satiated in that way. But apart from that, it's just it's a darker trailer than season one, which I appreciate. I think they've kind of found the vision that they want to go for season two. One thing I'll say is I think the costuming has really improved as well, and I'm someone who really enjoyed the costumes in season one, but just from this trailer, like the hairstyles, the costumes, the weapons, the armor, everything just kind of looks like it's been scaled up, and I think that it just looks a lot grander than season one already. So all in all, my expectations, which were quite high to start with, were majorly exceeded.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And I know I should say, actually, for listeners who perhaps aren't on Twitter, we have technically already spent 3 hours talking about this trailer. We did a live call-in show on Twitter. So Anna and I discussed the trailer, and then we had people on Twitter from the Lord of the Rings and Rings of Power community. They called into the show. They gave us their views. They asked their questions. We debated theories, all sorts of brilliant stuff. The audio quality isn't great on those things, so I don't upload those to the podcast, but I'll link it in the description. But the reason I bring it up was because I remember saying on that show that, when I think about my overall impression, yes, it was that it was darker than I thought. Yes, it was how centered around Sauron and Celebrimbor and the rings. People often joked that for a show called Rings of Power, season one had very few rings in it and very little ring making and ring adjacent material in general. So I think that was the overall impression. But as you kind of said, you had high expectations. I think I tried to lower my expectations in the lead up to the trailer because I really wanted to be excited, but I was also like, don't get your expectations too high. Just control that. And I watched it, and I sat here on my sofa next to where I'm sitting now. And fun fact for everyone, I did actually record my reaction to the trailer. Now, that will never see the light of day because it's largely 2 minutes of me pulling a kind of contorted, shocked face and then occasionally blurting out things like Elrond with a sword, which was about all the commentary I could muster at the time. So that will never see the light of day. But all I'm trying to say is, whatever my expectations were, this trailer blew them out the water. Like you said, I think it was superior to most of the trailers for season one. I mean, I did really love the trailer they did for San Diego Comic-Con, and even their last trailer was very strong. But like you say, their first couple of teaser trailers definitely felt like it was slow to get going, and I almost wonder whether they weren't quite sure how they wanted to frame the show. And season one represents that in some ways. It's a little bit setting everything up, introducing characters, almost laying down the pieces on the chessboard. But now the piece, as Emma Horvath, who plays Earion, says in the behind the scenes video, the piece on the chessboard are there, now they're moving. And
you mentioned her a lot quicker than I thought you would. We've not even gotten to Númenor yet.
Listen, it was a good metaphor. I'm just stealing it. Anyone could have said it, and I would have copied it. Anyway, please, I let you talk.
Did you?
No, not really. But yeah, I mean, I can't really add anything to your overall thoughts because you've said so much of what I think in terms of that more focused approach, that darker approach. And on the kind of visual aspect, the costumes, as you said, I've been watching a few YouTube reaction videos to the trailer, not from hate watchers, but from just, the kind of general YouTube reaction channels. And one of the most interesting things I've seen is quite a few people saying, wow, I mean, season one looked impressive, or, season one's visuals were amazing. But, I heard people repeatedly say it looks like they've taken the visuals to another level. Yeah. And I don't even know whether I agree, because I think the visuals for season one were so amazing, but I think the things they're doing with it if that makes sense, are more impressive. So season 1 had a few moments of real visual splendor, but season 2, just because of the nature of the story, we're getting more and more of these moments which allow them to lean into the artistry, into the visual effects, into the costuming. And we'll definitely return to talk about the costuming when it comes to the elves, because there's lots of interesting things to say there. But yeah, overall, 100% love the trailer, exceeded my wildest expectations. For people like me who, Celebrimbor is my favorite character. He's been the one I've been most excited about even before the show started. I couldn't be happier with how that trailer has got me thinking about season 2. So, we're going to be talking about each of the plot lines in turn. Like I said, we're recording this in 2 parts, so we're just going to try and get through the Eregion, Sauron, maybe a bit of the Mordor stuff today. But we do realize that because we're slow and we're not influencers and we're not with the time and, we have not made any dollars off this, we realize it's been a week and some of you might not have watched the trailer recently or might not have watched it in a few days or, in my case, might not have watched it in half an hour. And I thought, for those of you who enjoy my little comedic recaps, like I did with the plot lines on the last episode, I thought I would give, a sort of dramatic reading of the trailer. Anna, are you excited for my dramatic reading?
I mean, you know how much I love your dramatic readings. I was half expecting one when we did the space the other day, but I was sorely disappointed.
You called me out on it.
I did, so I hope you've had time to make up for that now.
Listen, I'll do my best, but here we go. I haven't done one for the behind the scenes because that'd be silly, honestly. I'm not that silly a person. But here goes. My dramatic reading of the Season 2 teaser trailer for The Rings of Power. We begin where we left off Oh, Anna.
So, you can't stop. I'm sorry. You cannot go and not expect me to laugh.
Right, well, I won't do it again. I'm keeping this in. This isn't getting edited out. I'm telling you, this is making the final cut.
Okay.
I need people to understand how mean you are to me. Right, we go again. We begin where we left off last season, with Sauron walking into his new kingdom as the Prime Video logo is consumed by the black goo which is spread throughout this trailer worse than delusion spreads through a fandom. Our first new image shows Sauron in his Halbrand form, face illuminated by firelight, with eyes that are bloodshot and tear-filled, no doubt on the verge of tears because he remembered that he has no friends once again. Prince Doran tells us that an evil, ancient and powerful has returned. Now it's unclear whether he's talking about Middle-earth's perpetual sad boy, or the angry housecat of Khazad-dum that's just awoken in the basement. Or is it a third, much worse secret thing, as we see that the symbiote from Venom has escaped containment as it makes its way to Middle-earth and drags itself across a rocky cavern? On a happier note, Galadriel is back, and this time she's got friends who we can at least be sure are not villains in disguise, as she stands in a circle with Elrond and a handful of other elves. Admittedly, this happy note is rather short-lived, as we notice that they appear to be surrounded by ghostly shades with glowing blue eyes in a forest so creepy it feels like it's been stolen from a Brothers Grimm tale. Who could possibly rescue them? Galadriel tells her companions to prepare yourselves, but given what this season might contain, she could very well be talking to us. Elsewhere, we get a glimpse of bloody hands that look pretty mystical if you ask me, as a swarm of moths converge in a sandy chamber, and I don't wish to denigrate the stranger, but I am starting to think that his witch repellent skills aren't quite as good as we hoped. A rasping voice says, "He worms his way inside your mind, and the rest of him slithers in." Now, while I know that might be a dream scenario for some fanfiction writers, it looks like bad news for our characters. I can continue. It looks like bad news for our characters as the tree roots come alive in Lindon and snake their way towards an unsuspecting victim. All the while, an army of orcs and trolls march through the forest, probably up to no good and causing trouble in the elves' neighborhood.
Sorry, I'm still caught on the slithers thing.
No, it's fine. We're going to continue. We're going to make it through this.
It's fine. I'll be quiet.
Tears in my eyes. I'm not sure I'm going to make my way through this. Okay, this is staying in. Okay. Next, we see my best boy, Celebrimbor, having his evening rudely interrupted as a blinding light fills his forge, and the silhouette of a man begins to approach through the heavenly light and smoke. Scaramouche, no, I'm joking, I was going to do that. It's the silhouette of a man. It's just... I'll edit this bit out. I've got tears in my eyes. Oh, shit.
How has this descended so much already?
I tried to do too many jokes. Okay.
I'm still
Right.
caught on the slithers in joke.
Yeah, I know. And the silhouette of a man begins to approach through the heavenly light and smoke. A voice that sounds on the edge of a panic attack says, "I think he has been here. I think he has been here among us all along." What you can hear in the background is Anna laughing at my impression.
Sorry.
The first 10 minutes of this podcast are so chaotic. So yeah, the voice says, "I think he's been here among us all along." Who is here, you ask? Well, if it isn't our Lord of Wigs, Lord of Gifts, it's Sauron himself, walking through Eregion with a smile on his face that might as well say, Anna is going to wish that she only had to see Halbrand after what I'm about to do with this place.
No, right. Sauron could sack 500 cities and I'd still never wish to see Halbrand's face.
I can get through this, I promise. Yeah, it's fine. Okay. And from here we go to our classic trailer fast cut montage, which I shall now reel off in the same time the trailer gives us. A beautiful coastline, Galadriel riding, Miriel in the water, the worm returns, this time with tentacles. Disa looks concerned, King Doran looks through a hole, Khazad-dum has a cave-in. Elendil's in a mosh pit, Galadriel's screaming in the Red Room. Fade Routher's got an orc twin and he's licking a knife. Oh, hang on, I missed a voiceover saying, every soul in Middle-earth is in peril. Well, duh, I respond. Anyway, back to the montage. Eregion at night. Ignore the ominous fires across the river. The three elven rings doing some regenerative gardening. King Doran with some new bling. Arondir doing a spin. Wait, was that Isildur? Never mind, there's an eagle in Númenor, and Pharazôn with a sword. Theo's looking sad. What's new there? Isildur's looking worried. What's new part 2? Flaming projectiles are headed for Eregion. I told you to ignore them. And look, Adar is back with a facelift. The stranger's got a new walking stick, and Nori's in a tornado. Galadriel's firing fire arrows. Armored Elrond's got a sword, and he's got friends. And breathe, but not for long, because as we see Celebrimbor casting the ring, make that rings into the fire. Sauron's back, he's standing amidst the rubble, and although he's surrounded by Celebrimbor's guards, he doesn't look worried. Wait, what's he doing with his hands? Oh no, Celebrimbor, run! A flash of light and a transformation not seen since Frozen brings us to the end of our trailer, as the title screen rolls and we remember, it's coming on August 29th. There's 102 days to go. We are back. We are so back. And end scene. Anna, your thoughts on that? I'm going to take a sip of my wine. Tell the audience your thoughts on my great read-through.
I mean, I'm so very glad that you made the call back to Frozen, and I hope that you know who Elsa is by now. Yeah,
she's the one who sings.
She is indeed. That was honestly that was impeccable, and I think that Amazon should hire you to kind of recap every single trailer they put out. Though I am quite proud of myself that I got through that, because there were a few times that I thought I was going to crack. For example, the orc that you compared to Fade Routher from Dune.
Yep.
That one nearly got me.
I mean, I'm not going to edit out the bits where we did collapse in laughter, so I think saying that we made it through is probably a bit of a exaggeration, but we made it through, and that's the important point. Right. Now that we've got that done, and the audience, obviously, because they will have forgotten all about the trailer, but now they remember the trailer, now they've had my wonderful read-through. Anna, we're going to start off, and we're going to get through as much as we can tonight. Let's talk about Sauron, Eregion, the elves. What do you want to talk about first?
I mean, I feel like for my sake and yours, probably the first place I want to start is Celebrimbor. Does that sound good?
Yes, let's definitely start with Celebrimbor.
Perfect. So, I mean, I know that when we spoke, obviously it'll be the episode before this, one of my hopes and one of your hopes was maybe a cautious hope was to see how Celebrimbor's storyline plays out in this season. And, while this trailer might not answer all of our kind of hopes, all of our worries, it certainly puts us in a more optimistic place, I would say, at least concerning Celebrimbor's storyline. I think what I wanted to see from this was the writers realizing that he needed to be centered this season. And I feel like that's completely what we've got from this trailer. You know, it felt like the Rings of Power Season 2 trailer, but it very much felt like Celebrimbor and Annatar's trailer at the same time, you know?
No, I 100% agree. And in a way, I've seen a lot of people say, "Oh, this was Sauron's trailer," and it is. But the point is that the whole story of Sauron at this point in the Second Age, he's obsessed with Celebrimbor. So it is Celebrimbor's story. And as you said, it's very important then. And we know all the reasons season one they couldn't focus on Celebrimbor as much, the recasting, the decision to focus on Galadriel, all of that true. But I have to say, I was just so delighted. I mean, the first shot we get of Celebrimbor is him in his forge. It looks like we might be in his new tower that he was building, because that thing looked grand, that room he was in. And he descends these stairs, this bright white light. You know, he looks like he's almost maybe woken up from sleeping or whatever. Maybe he just stays up all night designing new things to create. And there's the ominous music and we see this light. And what I love about that shot is if you look at it closely and if you're watching a HD version of the trailer, the light isn't just a solid light. There's crackles and flashes in it, as almost as if it's expanding, as if it's a portal kind of opening, and there's energy with it and there's smoke wreathing around it. And then we see the silhouette coming to it. And I think for many of us, this is the moment we were waiting for all last season. And in a funny way, it's going to be a great parallel to that moment in season 1, episode 8, where we get the shot of Celebrimbor and he's in an archway in his forge, or he's framed by the archway in his forge. And then Halbrand comes into the forge and says, is anyone there? And then we get the Celebrimbor line, which is one of my favorites from season 1, because it's such a Sauron move to be like, oh, not just Celebrimbor, the Celebrimbor. Oh, aren't you handsome? Aren't you good at making rings? Would you mind if we became friends? And I just loved that we've kind of almost got that mirrored now, where Celebrimbor is walking into his forge, and through an arched shape, we now get this figure who we all, I think, rightly assume to be Sauron in his Annatar form. And it just gave me that confidence that I was like, okay, they're doing it. They're doing the thing, the thing.
They're doing it, and at the same time, they're giving it the weight that it needs. I mean, I feel like from the very few shots that we've seen, it's very dramatic. You have Annatar showing up in this kind of gold light, almost as if he is coming as an emissary of the Valar, like we know he does in the story. So it feels like they know exactly what they want to do with this storyline, which fills me with a lot of confidence. And I mean, at least from what I've seen in this trailer, there was kind of issues with the last minute casting last season. Charles Edwards only came in quite last minute to play Celebrimbor, but listen, he knows what he's got to do this season. Whether we get a bit of a cliffhanger and we get Celebrimbor into the start of the next season, or whether this is it for Celebrimbor, Charles Edwards knows exactly what he's got to do. And from the few shots that we've seen of him this season, oh boy, is he ready to bring a performance. I mean, the shot of him throwing the rings into the fire and almost in what you think will be a way to destroy them. Just that one shot, his expression is like haunting. That is stuck with me from the moment that I saw it in the trailer. And that's only, 0.1 seconds of his performance that we've seen. So I've got very high hopes for him this season.
Yeah, me too. And I think let's just talk about where we do see Celebrimbor across these two videos, the trailer and the behind the scenes. First, we get the shot as I described in the Forge, and I just want to briefly touch on that point you made, that they're giving it the weight to make Sauron in his Annatar form feel like an emissary of the Valar. Because for our readers who haven't read the Silmarillion or any of the kind of unfinished tales or anything outside the Lord of the Rings, it's important to note that when Sauron comes to Eregion to help the elves make the rings and to manipulate them, and specifically to manipulate Celebrimbor, yes, he looks like an elf, but he's coming as a servant of the Valar. He's saying that he is an emissary, and the assumption is that the elves believe he is a Maiar, so one of the lesser gods within Tolkien's pantheon. But the thing about the book is, we know that he comes in a fair form, but we don't get any description of, like, why do the elves believe he's a Maiar? Because, you wouldn't have any logical reason, given the real lack of Maiar in Middle-earth by the Second Age. You wouldn't have much reason to believe this random guy just saying he's a Maiar, unless he was able to demonstrate it somehow. So I think this shot of him, almost barging into Celebrimbor's forge in a very dramatic, and as people have said, it's very reminiscent of the scene in season 1, episode 1, when Galadriel's sailing to Valinor and the clouds part and we get the light. It's almost the reverse of that shot where instead of the clouds parting, it's the light growing and it's smoke billowing out rather than clouds. And I think that was, one thing this show loves to do is rhyme its visual language. And I think that was just fantastic. And then in terms of other shots we got with him, let's start with that one you mentioned, where it looks like he's trying to destroy the rings, and then the final shot we get of him in the trailer, which seems to be him confronting Sauron along with his guards, and it looks like Celebrimbor's in a pretty bad way. I mean, his hair's all over the place. He's got blood on his face. He's got dirt. He's holding a hand, which a lot of people thought was cut off, but it's not actually. If you look at a good HD still, you can tell that it's kind of burnt and mangled. Now, my theory is...
I did bring up this scene before in my introduction, but I got very rudely cut off by Harry, so
well,
do
you know why you got cut off? Is because this is when we were meant to be discussing it, and I just asked you what you thought about the trailer, and in my head I was like, Anna, we're going to have the discussion later.
Anyway, sorry, rudely interrupted. See what it's like.
Yeah,
carry on.
It's all right. This is why I'm the host and you're the co-host. But no, in all seriousness, so we get that shot, and it's just, between those, we only get 3 shots of him in the trailer. Technically 4, because I think he's the figure in Lindon where we see the roots kind of snaking their way towards him. It matches his costume. But I mean, talk about just telling the audience straight up what a traumatic time Celebrimbor was going to have this season. What did you think of in terms of them doing that? Because obviously a lot of the audience hasn't read the books, doesn't know what happened to Celebrimbor. To me, that feels like a bold way to do it, but I kind of admire it. I don't know what you think.
I mean, I absolutely admire it. One of the things that they have to do this season, regardless of how the season ends, we know, at least by now, that we're getting the Siege of Eregion, and book readers, we know how that ends, and it's not good for Celebrimbor. And given his lack of screen time in season 1, what the screenwriters have to do, what everyone has to do really for this season, is get the audience to care about Celebrimbor. Because if they don't care about him, then this scene at the end between him and Annatar, this kind of final confrontation, is going to hold absolutely no weight. If this just this random elf who was introduced kind of too late in the season and wasn't given enough screen time to mean anything. But as you said last week, 8 episodes is a long time to spend with someone. And if you're given that adequate amount of time and you're given the right moments with them, that is more than enough time to kind of really care about a character. So I think that they're fully aware that this is where Celebrimbor is going to end up. And I like that it's not going to be a surprise. They have this shot post Siege of Eregion in the trailer, and while it might not mean much to someone who doesn't know what's going to happen, we can tell that these 2 characters are going to have this confrontation. Celebrimbor has suffered some grievous bodily harm. As you said, it's most likely kind of burnt from trying to destroy the rings. I just agree with you. I think I admire that they're going down that route, and I think that they're going to try their hand at getting the audience to care about Celebrimbor, which I think is one of the most important parts of this season. I mean, book readers, we already know we've had a lot of traumatized people tweeting on the timeline, like, please don't hurt Celebrimbor. He's just a boy, leave him alone. My poor boy, just with that picture of him holding his hand. It's a tragic story. He's a tragic character, and I think that, regardless of how cliffhangery we're left at the end of this season, it's tragic for him, and I think we're going to know that from the start. He's one of those characters that's kind of very much doomed by the narrative, and you know what's going to happen to them from the start. It's very much like Frodo Baggins, from the start of The Lord of the Rings, you can tell that something bad's going to happen to him. He's been given this burden, and it's not going to end well, and you kind of just have to follow him on this path where you know that there's not really a way out for him. And I think that they might go down a similar road for Celebrimbor, where you want him to succeed. We'll probably every time I reread the Silmarillion or I rewatch The Lord of the Rings and stuff, I have this problem where I'm like, okay, maybe this time Celebrimbor will be fine. He won't be impaled and he'll be completely fine. And I reread Lord of the Rings and I'm like, maybe this time Boromir will be okay and he'll survive. And they never do, but it's that need to have them survive and that kind of caring that they bring out in the audience that I think is very important for Celebrimbor.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people have made comparisons with that shot of him trying to destroy the rings in the fire to one of the final shots in the kind of Mount Doom sequence with Frodo in Return of the King, in Peter Jackson's Return of the King, where we see Frodo with his hand outstretched, willing himself to let go of the ring. And I think it's one of the things I talked about, I think last week on The Space, was this idea that the recurring message we got with Celebrimbor is that true creation requires sacrifice. But we're almost going to have the inversion this season where his creations are going to be what causes the sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's going to be what causes so much war and terror and awfulness and the tragedy of his own life and his own story. So I agree with you. I love that they're being bold with that. I like that they're taking what I think of as the Shakespearean narrative approach, the most famous example being Romeo and Juliet, where in the introduction to Romeo and Juliet, you are told that these two are star-crossed lovers and they're doomed to die, basically. And so people often say that, you need surprises at every turn in a story, but you don't. If it's well told, there's nothing wrong with you kind of being aware of the grand arc of this story. And I think what's interesting, just to stay on Celebrimbor a couple more minutes before we move on to Sauron, I think the most interesting thing in the behind-the-scenes video was we also saw a bit of his interaction with other characters. We saw one shot, we didn't get any dialogue from it, but we saw one shot of him with Prince Durin in what looked like Eregion. So obviously we're still wondering how and when Na'vi might be introduced this season, but great to see that we are going to get that part of Celebrimbor's stories from the books of him being closest in friendship with the dwarves. And then we also get perhaps the most intriguing bit of dialogue we get through the behind the scenes, which is Celebrimbor and Galadriel in what looks like the forest. Could be in Linden, could be in Eregion. It's not quite clear. And he turns to her and he says, I've had an unexpected visitor. And of course, we know who that unexpected visitor is. And the look on Galadriel's face is, oh crap, I think I know who that unexpected visitor is. But it's going to be really, and maybe this will help segue us, unless there's anything else you want to add in Celebrimbor, but maybe this is how we segue into talking about the unexpected visitor himself.
I mean, the only thing I really wanted to say about that particular scene, and maybe this ties more into Galadriel than it does Celebrimbor, but I have seen a lot of people point out that the outfit and the hair that she has in that scene, where Celebrimbor approaches her to tell her about this visitor, looks very similar to this shot of her kind of screaming, bathed in this red light. So I wonder whether those two will have anything in common, whether this kind of triggers some sort of, I don't know, like a flashback for her, whether it might be something to do with Sauron in her mind, something like that, whether they have anything to do with each other at all. But people have pointed out that she kind of is wearing the exact same outfit, has the same hairstyle in those two moments.
Yeah, I think there's two ways they could go about it. Either that whole thing is a dream sequence and it's going to be at first Galadriel thinking she's awake, and then she, like you say, you get the nightmarish red colour, she'll probably see Sauron. Or Celebrimbor is literally saying, I've had an unexpected visitor. And then he's like, Annatar, why don't you come out from behind the tree? Come over. I want to introduce you to my friend Galadriel. And then Galadriel sees him. And that's maybe where we get the line in the trailer where she says, he's Sauron. Yeah. And then obviously nothing's going to happen in the kind of, the physical realm. But like you say, what if there's a kind of a mental battle, a kind of another one of these vision sequences, dream sequences, like we got at the end of episode 8, where Sauron tries to invade her mind. So that could be really interesting. But again, what's great about this is, and I don't think we're the type of podcast that, listen, there are lots of other YouTubes and podcasts who are going to spend 3 hours making up theories. We're probably not going to do that. We want to more talk about the substance of what we can see and try and analyze it. But we're not going to sit here and try and come up with 12 different theories. But I think where we're both at with that scene is, there's definitely something going on. It is not going to be as simple as a confrontation and then someone flicks a red light switch. Something strange is going on there.
Absolutely, and I'm very excited to see how it plays out. I mean, both ways that you've just said are very intriguing. I mean, I'm more leaning towards the whole thing as a dream sequence. Again, you said we're not going to theorize that much, but that is my take on it. I mean, I think it would be interesting. It would kind of make me laugh, actually, if he was like, I've had an unexpected visitor. Here's Sauron. Do you remember him?
I mean, maybe let's transition to talking about Sauron then. And
Yeah.
this isn't so much theory. This is just like based on what we've seen, based on what we saw in season 1. This is the big question everyone's been talking about all week. So in the trailer, we see Sauron in this form, but it's very clear that the only shots we see of him from the front, where we can see his face, come from later episodes in the season when the siege of Eregion is happening. So, is he wearing that face the whole time he's in Eregion? And if so, how are they going to explain that? I'll let you go first in terms of how you think they might explain that.
Okay, so I hope that he is. I kind of hope that he approaches just in this full Annatar form. And whether he will call himself Annatar, I don't know whether rights are going to work on that, because if I'm being completely honest, I don't know whether that name specifically is mentioned in the appendices. So I don't know whether that's how he'll approach them. However, we did speak a bit on the space about how it would work. You know, a lot of people's first reactions to the trailer were, "Oh my god, they have just put a wig and ears on Halbrand, and they're gonna convince everyone that he's this completely different person." So I've got like a few thoughts on that. And my first thought was that Harry, you yourself were like, you probably wouldn't recognize him at first. And honestly, you've got to think that this is someone that we've been watching for months. We've been rewatching the show. We see his face all of the time. Shut up, Harry. Um, so, and then you have Celebrimbor, who's met him a handful of times and hasn't seen him for a while at this point. And when he did meet him, he was this kind of shaggy haired, bearded, kind of just washed up man. And sorry, that wasn't meant in like
That was a
insulting
you
way.
thing.
But and then if he meets him again after all these months, when he's kind of on this brink of desperation to create something as brilliant as what he created with Halbrand, whether he actually will recognize him at first is up in the air to me. But I think there's ways that they could go about it. You know, we know that Sauron is a Maiar. He's not just an elf, you know, he's got this kind of swathe of magical abilities at his fingertips. And it does seem like they're going to go down this route of using more magic in season 2. At least the vibe we've got from the trailer is that that seems to be implemented a little bit more. It's this kind of darker magic that's been interweaved with everything. So whether he'll go down that route of he's just kind of charming them kind of magically into not recognizing them, or as we mentioned, what I would quite like to see is Celebrimbor does know that something's wrong. You know, he knows that he's seen this person before, but perhaps he doesn't know quite to the extent that it is Sauron. You know, we don't know that Galadriel said that. All we know that was that Galadriel said, if Halbrand comes back, you know, don't kind of treat with him anymore. So if we have this Celebrimbor who's so desperate to create things like the 3 rings that he made, he might be willing to just kind of look past this uneasiness, this potential threat. If Galadriel never made it clear who this person is, listen, he might just want to create things again, and I don't blame him. If this person
Who
comes
can blame him?
in this magical light and is said he comes to you as an emissary of the Valar to create things that you've never been able to create by yourself before, would you say no? Because I wouldn't.
I wouldn't say no, but I'm admittedly very weak for magical men, so maybe
Yeah.
that's just me. I think you've elucidated kind of what I think are the most likely, that yes, Celebrimbor recognizes him to some extent, but chooses to believe the explanation he's given by Sauron. Like you say, obviously they don't have rights to Annatar through the appendices, but we understand they work with the Tolkien estate on a kind of case-by-case basis, so who knows, maybe they've got access to the name for season 2. I don't think it really matters whether he calls himself Annatar or not. Like you say, the point is he needs to describe himself as an emissary of the Valar. The more interesting thing to me is, so there's a few options. There's, like you say, he recognizes him, but he accepts Sauron's explanation that, you know, oh yes, that was me in my Halbrand form. Galadriel didn't understand who I was, and when she found out I was from the Valar, she rejected me because she's, you know, still pissed off about the ban of the Noldor, you know, kind of after the exile. You know, there's lots of ways they could do it in terms of the history of Galadriel's story and trying to convince Celebrimbor that she's got a problem with them. Obviously, Galadriel famously rejected the pardon of the Valar, so there's an interesting aspect there. So that's option 1, which I think is the most likely. Option 2 is what I have coined, and some people have picked this up, you know, and I doff my cap to them, the Clark Kent theory, which is, listen, as you said, if you've met this guy once and you live in Middle-earth, so you're not familiar with the concept of wigs and prosthetic noses and ears and makeup, if this guy then returns months later and he looks completely different, like say he's bathed in a golden light, I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't recognize him. And to back up my theory, so this just isn't about my blindness. Like I said, I've been watching YouTube reaction videos, and on several of them, people have gone, "Oh, who's that?" Or I even saw someone who's read the books, so he went, "Oh, look, they're doing Annatar." And then he said, and I thought this was my favorite bit because I was like, I'm so spot on about this. He said, "Oh, it's really good. The guy they've cast to play Annatar still looks a little bit like the guy who played Halbrand." And I was like, thank you. Like, I'm not alone in thinking this, that you don't, if you're not someone who is obsessively part of the Tolkien community, you don't immediately recognize it.
It's an insane physical transformation. I mean, I mentioned it before, but even just the physicality that he brought to it, completely, he looks completely different. So I don't blame people who didn't recognize him.
Yeah, it's the way he walks, the way he holds himself, the smile. I mean, just there's venom in those smiles he gives in the trailer, like just pure shit-eating grins. Pardon my language. So there's the Clark Kent theory, and then the third theory, which I think is an interesting one, but I like this one the least, is that I don't like it the least, I just think it's the least likely, is that because in the trailer they purposely didn't show us any shots of Annatar pre-Siege of Eregion, there is a possibility they have cast another actor to play him, and he will play him through, episodes 1 through 5 or 1 through 6, and then he'll leave Celebrimbor and be like, "Sorry, I've got to go, I've got important things to do," and then he'll return later with Charlie Vickers' face. I think that's less likely because I think it lessens the reveal at the end. I think it's really important that the guy Celebrimbor has been interacting with all season is the same one who looks him in the eyes and says, no, you answer to me. I helped you make these rings. Give them to me now. Tell me where the 3 elven rings are, or I will torture you and kill you. Because that's the important point of like, someone the other day asked me why Celebrimbor is such a fascinating character to me and why I love him so much. And I gave a very long answer. But the last point I said about it is, the thing I love about Celebrimbor's character is that he makes a lot of mistakes. He's a tragic character, but in the end, he does the right thing. He resists Sauron. He doesn't give him the rings. And even when he's captured and, everything that happens after that, he still refuses to tell him where the 3 elven rings are. And we all know how that works out for Celebrimbor. So I think it adds to the tragedy if it's the same person with the same face. So I think that's the least likely.
I agree, and I hope that that's not the way they go about it. I mean, I feel like if they cast another actor only to have this reveal at the end, they would be kind of going for another audience trickery moment as well. Is this person who's interacting with Celebrimbor Sauron, or is he not? And we've been there, we've done that in season 1, whether you knew who Halbrand was from the start or not. We don't need anything like that again. And I think what we've said about this season is we as the audience are probably going to know who Sauron is from the start. The important thing is kind of Celebrimbor's relationship to him, and I think it will add more weight, so much more weight. As you said, he is a tragic character. How much more weight would it add if Celebrimbor had this uneasy feeling about him the whole time, only to realize at the end that he should have listened to his gut, he should have listened to his instincts, but he was so blinded by his need to create that he disregarded all of that, and in the end it was kind of his undoing. I think that would just have so much more of an impact story-wise than this just full-on deception of someone with a different face coming to him.
Yeah, I think that will add to the interactions with, we don't know how much time Galadriel might spend in Eregion. I don't think it's going to be a lot because it looks like she's going to be going on her own journeys, and we'll talk about that later. Be interesting to see what happens with Gil-galad and Elrond. But again, I think part of this season, and to return to Celebrimbor again for a moment, I think part of this season might be about that once, as the voice says in the trailer, he worms his way into your mind and then the rest of him slithers in. I think part of that is going to be not just driving Celebrimbor's fuel to create, not only driving up his ego and his pride. Obviously, we saw in the behind-the-scenes video, which we'd already heard about, this statue to Feanor. Yeah. So who knows, maybe Celebrimbor is going to make that this season as his pride grows and he starts to feel more like his grandfather, who crafted the Silmarils. I think one of the really interesting things might be, to what extent does Annatar, Sauron, cause Celebrimbor to become estranged from the rest of the elves, from Gil-galad, from Galadriel, from Elrond? Like, to what extent, by the time the siege is starting, he's isolated, and that's why we're actually seeing Elrond lead an army from outside Eregion, because perhaps Celebrimbor has cut himself off.
I mean, yeah, because it's strange from just the perspective of the Rings of Power show. I mean, part of how Sauron approaches Celebrimbor is down to how he thinks he can approach him. They had these interactions in the end of season 1, and what you kind of get from that is how eager Celebrimbor was to create, and how kind of entranced he was by what Halbrand had to give to him, the skills he had to teach him, everything that he could give to him. So in his mind, it's probably not, it's like, as you say, he gets into your mind, just a little part of him gets in, and then the rest of him slithers in. Don't look at me like that. For everyone listening to this, Harry just smirked when I said that. Dirty minded.
I made the joke first in the read through. I'm not blaming you in it. It's just I've ruined this for both of us. That's what I've done. I'm sorry.
But yeah. So I think that so Annatar is probably very well aware that he just needs that initial footing into Celebrimbor's mind, and he probably doesn't need to disguise himself fully for that. Once he's got that, he knows he has him hooked, and he can just slither the rest of the way in.
Yes, indeed. Lots of slithering. Because one of the things I was fascinated about was the outfit we see Sauron wearing in those shots. Now, that, for me, is not the outfit he's going to be wearing all season. He's not wandering around in black and gold and a piece of armor on his shoulder when he arrives as servant to the Valar. That would be a little bit kind of like ignoring all the warning signs, Celebrimbor. Do you not see the red flags? The man is dressed like a villain. But I asked my followers, I said, what do you think about this costume? Like, specifically the golden sash he wears, because there's a really interesting pattern. And I posted a picture, I asked my followers on Twitter, and I got loads of interesting answers. People were saying reminds them of kind of Nordic, kind of Old Norse patterns you'd see on kind of Viking longboats and other kind of sculptures. Another really interesting one was Celtic work, so the Book of Kells being a famous example of this kind of iconography. And then I had a really interesting answer from our friend Holly on Twitter, who goes by the username Fourth Aerlingas, said, all aspects of the costume look like a snake. And what she meant by that was all the patterns on the gold sash are like coils and kind of writhing figures and loops and all these interconnected things. Then you have the shoulder guard, which I'd said, I don't think that's that connected, because to me it looks like kind of quite beaten, quite rusted metal. And she said, but what about if it's like snake skin, like the scales on a snake skin? And suddenly I was like,
yeah.
It almost reframed the trailer for me, where I was like, he slithers in. Yeah. We have the image of the black goo moving. We have the image of the roots. And it is that whole kind of biblical, he's the snake in the Garden of Eden.
I mean, it is one of those things where once you kind of click onto it, you realize that the whole trailer, they kind of make these allusions to him as a snake. And it is really interesting because, in a sense, he is this kind of biblical villain. A lot of people refer to the Silmarillion as Tolkien's Bible or the Middle-earth Bible. And you have these kind of biblical adjacent characters. And, Sauron is very serpent-like. He's often described like that, especially in his Annatar form, when he's kind of slithering and sneaking and kind of whispering into people's ears. And it is very reflective of the snake in the Garden of Eden, just this kind of not outright, I don't know how to describe it, that he went solely to Eve, whispered in her ear, he's kind of slithering around her, making sure she was kind of doing the wrong thing, and is he not doing that exact same thing to Celebrimbor?
Yeah, and I think, like you said, obviously the Silmarillion we think of as having a lot of that biblical structure, and traditionally we think of Morgoth, Melkor, being the Satan figure because he is this fallen, he is this Lucifer figure of the fallen angel. But Sauron fits this mold as well, obviously, as a Maiar. And what it made me think of, and someone messaged me the other day, I said, sorry, I'm reading a Bible passage right now. And someone was like, and this person said, you're not that religious. I said, no, I'm not. But the trailer had me thinking of this one Bible passage that I remembered that had been quoted in something else entirely. And I found it, and it's this passage from Corinthians, where it says, "And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising, then, if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness." And all I could think about was that image of the figure coming through the light. And I was like, oh my God. And we know the showrunners themselves, they have a religious background. And when I saw that, I was like, wow, they are really leaning heavily into this whole fallen angel, Lucifer, snake in the Garden of Eden. And I just think, I don't mind it, because I know some people are like, oh, it's going too far towards that allegorical side, but I don't think it is. I think it's doing the applicability thing that we talk about with Tolkien, that like Sauron is this figure who fits that mold. It doesn't mean that Sauron is the Satan figure or the Lucifer figure, or however you want to describe it, but he fits this mold entirely. And so, like you said, once you see the trailer in that light, and I'd like to say, back on the costume front, I've heard other people have different interpretations. Like, some people are saying like it's feathers on his shoulder, like a fallen angel. Other people have said it reminds them of the elvish kind of scale mail or the dwarvish scale mail. You know, like I said, people have looked into the patterns different ways. But I have to say, the version I found most convincing is this idea of him being a snake, and it's not reframe my idea of the character, because I was already aware of that, but the way the show is specifically tackling this part of Sauron's story, to me, I mean, it just feels so spot on.
I agree. I mean, I feel like it's as you said, you know, not leaning too much into the allegorical side of it, but you can't. It's intrinsic to his character in a way. That is how he's described. It's kind of how he's envisioned, even in the Silmarillion. And I think the showrunners aren't doing it too heavy-handed. I mean, you said, you know, you kind of watch the trailer, you realize at some point, oh, they could be going for this, and then you rewatch the trailer in a different way. You know, you don't have to watch it in this way of, oh, they're making Sauron out to be like a snake. You know, it's a very subtle way that they've done it. You know, it's like this kind of slithering black mass and the slithering roots. These all could be taken kind of as isolated things, but it's if you want to take them and kind of group them together as this whole allegorical, or just as this kind of snake imagery just for the one character, you can do. But again, it's not too heavy-handed. You know, they're not literally giving him like little snakes on his outfit. So I think that would be a little bit too much.
Yeah, and like I said, I think he'll be wearing a different outfit for the rest of the time. Okay, let's tackle the last couple of pieces on Sauron and Eregion. The most interesting thing I thought about the trailer was, it seems to me like Sauron might already be inside of Eregion when the siege happens. Not 100% sure about this, but I think he might be, because obviously in the last shots there's rubble all around, so this is obviously post when the catapults and the trebuchets are fired and maybe the walls have been breached. Who knows where we're at with it. But in one of the other shots, he's walking through Eregion, and yes, there are people running around, but nothing's on fire yet. You know, it's probably just people realizing they're under siege. And so that makes me think, how exactly is this going to play out? Does he... I think he will leave Eregion at one point, because he's going to have to coordinate with Adar and the orcs, unless, you know, I don't know how else it would work. But it's fascinating to me, because I suddenly think, wow, how is Sauron going to be all over the place this season? Are we going to get divergent timelines? Is he going to have some ability to kind of worm his way into places, you know, through his shape-shifting? I'm kind of fascinated how they'll tackle that.
Yeah, me too. And I think, at least on the side of the siege, I think Adar will play a big role in that. I mean, we've discussed it before, that there's a reason that they recast Adar, I think. You know, if his character was inconsequential to this season, it would have been a lot easier to just kind of say, you know, Joseph Mull played him in the first season. He introduced Sauron as this bigger villain. You could have left that there. There's a reason that they brought someone else to play him in this season, and I have my opinions on that we'll get into when we go on to the kind of Mordor side of things. But I do think that he has a big role to play, and I think that he will be the kind of person that Annatar uses to distract the elves while he's kind of wreaking havoc inside Eregion. Adar will be the distraction outside for Gil-galad and his armies. And I think, it's like you said, how is he going to kind of construct all of this from inside Eregion? You know, will he kind of take these shapes to get out of there, get back in unnoticed? But I do think Adar will have something to do with the siege of Eregion, whether he's the one who kind of leads the charge, while Annatar, Halbrand, Sauron, whatever form he's in, kind of takes that moment to get to Celebrimbor and the rings before he has the chance to escape.
Yeah, I mean, we know it's going to be a 2-episode battle, so it's one of these things. It's, does he start outside and get in? Is he already inside? And that, there's so many different ways to look at this, and I'm kind of, this is why I don't want to spend too much time theorizing, because we could create a million different scenarios. So let's instead focus on one other aspect of the Sauron and Eregion storyline, and then I think we will have covered everything about Sauron. So, now, I know people will say there's so much more you could discuss. Yes, but there's a whole trailer, there's a whole behind-the-scenes video to discuss, and we'll find out more in the future. So this won't be the last time we discuss Sauron and Eregion. But the last part of it, which I think is where we start to bring in Galadriel and Gil-galad and Elrond, is the other things we see in the behind-the-scenes video, and in the trailer to a certain extent. We see Galadriel and Elrond riding. We see Galadriel and Elrond in Lindon, and they're wearing the same costumes they were in episode 8 of season 1. Galadriel's still wearing her green dress, Elrond's still wearing his green robes. We get a shot of Gil-galad in what looks like one of his chambers. New set, very exciting though. And he says, set a watch on every crossing. He must not escape. So I've seen a lot of people theorize that we're going to basically open episode 1. Galadriel's going to admit to Elrond what, he'd been trying to ask her at the end of episode 8 about where's Halbrand gone and what's going on. Elrond obviously found the scroll with the lineage of the Southland Kings. So a lot of people have said, well, clearly Galadriel is going to tell Elrond. They're going to ride at a breakneck speed back to Lindon, because Elrond's going to be like, we've really got to tell the High King about this. You should have mentioned it before. And they're going to get there, and they're going to say to Gil-galad, okay, this is what's happened. Who knows what Gil-galad's going to say about that? But then clearly, Elrond and Galadriel are going to go off on their journey. So the question becomes, I don't know I don't actually have a question. My thought is more just how is Gil-galad going to react to this? How does Elrond react to this? But then clearly Elrond and Galadriel go off on a hunt, we presume, for Sauron. And I kind of joked to someone that I said that it's like season 1 Galadriel, I'm on the hunt for Sauron. And then season 2 Galadriel is, let's try that again, but with more energy, more passion. It's kind of like she's like, let's try that again, guys, but this time we're going to get it right. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on those kind of clues we get in the behind the scenes. Like Galadriel is clearly, it looks like she is going to tell them. And here's my caveat. Unless when Gil-galad says, set a watch on every crossing, we must find him, could he be talking about someone else? Your thoughts, Anna?
So my first thought about that is that I'm clearly a very selfish person, because if I had fudged up as badly as Galadriel did in season 1, I would not be telling Gil-galad. Oh my god, absolutely not. That is coming with me to the grave. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean I brought Sauron to Middle Earth? What do you mean I helped create Mordor? What do you mean I brought him to Celebrimbor? That is, I'm taking that to the grave with me. So all the credit to Galadriel for actually admitting to what she did, because I would not.
I mean, listen, I think that's very good of you to admit. Now, I'll say that I think I was discussing this with our friend Erin, who's the account is Gilastel's Canvas, brilliant artist on Twitter and Instagram. And I was discussing it because we were having a conversation, and he said, I'm worried about Galadriel not telling them soon, because I feel like she's already guilty of so many things. And he wasn't saying this in a negative way about Galadriel. We were just having a discussion about her character. Like I said, well, what do you think she's guilty of? He's like, well, she forced Halbrand to take up the mantle of King of the Southlands. She forced the Númenorians to come to Middle-earth. And I kind of thought more and more about this, and I was like, yeah, but you can very easily reframe this to be like, oh, of course Halbrand was like, oh no, please, I don't want to be king. Oh no, please, I don't want to go to Middle-earth. Oh, okay, I'll accept it. And I think what we're going to see, and we'll probably discuss this when we continue our call and our recording tomorrow night, is I think we're going to see some of Halbrand / Sauron's backstory. And I think we're going to see that he wasn't such an innocent, bystander in all this all along.
Yeah, because I think, and I think it's a good point, because Galadriel very much did drive a lot of the plot that happened in season 1. She was kind of the calling for action in Númenor, in the Southlands, whatever. However, knowing that Halbrand is quite literally Sauron, it would be remiss to think that he was just there by chance, that he was letting all of this happen to him by chance, that he was like, well, I guess if she wants me to be the king of the Southlands, I can. I guess if they want me to go to Middle-earth and reclaim this land and this volcano, I guess I'll do it. There was very much a drive and a motivation and a plan behind what he was doing. It just so happened that it tied into what the kind of revenge and the path that Galadriel was already on. It's like we talked about before. Sauron is kind of this serpentine character. He knows how to manipulate people, and he knew what was driving Galadriel. And it's very clear how he was using that against her in season one. When you look back at him, and in this kind of, it almost makes sense why he took on this form of Halbrand as this kind of like sometimes bumbling, funny kind of comedic character, because you wouldn't take this as he's trying to manipulate me. He was very much just like acting clueless, but he wasn't. This whole time he knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah, and I think like there's a big thing with Sauron's story in the Second Age, which you kind of read in the Silmarillion, which is about Sauron. Perhaps there's basically a debate about whether Sauron did truly repent for his actions. But what we know is, and I often find myself arguing with our good friend, or not arguing, having a lively discussion with our friend T with Tolkien, where she talks about, well, actually, I think in season one there are signs that maybe he is truly repentant and maybe he is truly trying to change, and maybe that's why he does want to stay on Númenor. I would argue that Sauron could have at any point gone to the Valar and sought a sentence, which we know from Tolkien that he could have done. And frankly, the whole time with Galadriel, because this was one of my discussion points with Aaron, I was saying, well, listen, the thing is, yes, Galadriel was telling him to do all this stuff, but it's because he was lying to her. And we're kind of saying, well, he doesn't lie to her because he doesn't say, oh, I'm not this or I am that. But I was like, listen, you ask anyone who's in a friendship, a family member, a relationship, anyone who's close to you, an omission of truth is the same as a lie. So at any point, Sauron could have said who he was, and then, if he was truly repentant, he could have tried that. But he doesn't, because Sauron puts himself first. And he always has, and he always will.
It's this thing. I mean, the reason why the plotline worked for so many people in season one is that they wanted the audience to believe that he was just this kind of regular guy at first. And I think that's the reason why it works to him being so manipulative, is because there were these moments when, for example, him and Galadriel are in these jail cells and they're talking about the Southlands and things like that. And there are moments when it zooms in on Halbrand and he looks genuinely kind of torn and pensive and like he's thinking about it. Does he not just want to look like that so that Galadriel will kind of pursue this thread with him and think, okay, there's something he's not telling me. Maybe he does want to kind of sit on this throne of the Southlands again. It's very calculated, and it's interesting the way it is taken by some people, because I can see where the repentant Sauron's kind of theories would come from there. However, I do believe that it was very calculated the whole way through.
Yeah, and I think it's, by the way, to any audience members who do go along that line, I think that's perfectly fine, because I think the show is intentionally, I mean, listen, Tolkien intentionally leaned into this idea that we don't really know whether Sauron was genuine in his repentance. All we know is that he never truly follows through on it, and he never does the work to seek the forgiveness and to seek, the punishment for his crimes. Okay, maybe the last point on Sauron in Eregion before we'll who knows where we'll move on to next. We'll either stay on the elves or we'll go to Mordor. It's exciting. We don't know. But last line I want to discuss from the trailer about Sauron. In that scene where we see the figure coming through the light into Celebrimbor's forge, as I did a wonderful impression of, that character says, I think he has been here. I think he has been here among us all along. Is that a fake outline? Because to me, I'm like, okay, do you remember in season one, not to return to Tea with Tolkien again, but I remember she had this theory that up until episode 8, she was like, maybe we're going to find out that Annatar's been Eregion this whole time, and that's why they're building the forge, and that's why they're doing all this. And so I've seen some people saying, like, similarly, like, maybe they're going to retcon it, so Sauron really was in Eregion the whole time. I don't think that's what they're going to do, but do you think that is referring to him? And if so, what do you think that line might be? Because it's very curious to me.
I mean, it feels like a very on-the-nose line, out of all the things we can say, he's been here, he's been among us this whole time. I think that would lend itself to just a general, him and Eregion, he's been kind of manipulating the elves to his will. It depends when within that series that the line falls, It could be at the end of the Siege of Eregion, the elves realise they've been deceived. He's been among us the whole time. that's that. It could also be kind of earlier on. I mean, we're going to have these new characters introduced to us. I think someone said that they kind of thought that it might be Amelia Kenworthy's character who spoke this line.
Yeah, I think people seem to be split whether it's Amelia Kenworthy or Selena. I mean, I've watched some of their past performances when I was preparing for season 2 during the off season. I can't personally tell, but I think people were saying Amelia Kenworthy because she posted on Instagram with that caption.
Yeah, so I think it's either going to be something like that where it's just kind of a generic at the end of the season. It kind of pans out how we think it will, and that's why she says it. It could also be at the very start of the season. We don't know what character this is going to be who says it. What if it's like you said, Galadriel and Elrond get to Gil-galad, tell him about what's happened. That's the reaction. This could be an elf within their council, someone close to Gil-galad having a conversation with him. That could be them reflecting on the previous season. He was there in Eregion with them. That it could be something like that. It just depends on where it falls within the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think like I say, we might be overreading it, and actually it's exactly what we think in terms of this is going to be a line in episode 8 where one of the Elven Smiths is like, oh, we really messed up. Yeah. So, okay, let's leave that there. So, I think we're really done talking about Sauron and Celebrimbor and Eregion, and I'm sure no one can tell that we're recording this segment on the next day, so this has hopefully been a seamless audio experience for everyone. But we haven't really talked a lot about the other Elven characters, what they're going to be doing outside of Eregion. And I think the most interesting one for me personally, and partly this is because I think he had the most interesting story and character development, and his actor, Robert Aramayo, did such a fantastic job, is Elrond, of course. And I'm really fascinated to see what they're going to do with him, both in terms of his actual plot, but more importantly, I think in terms of his character development. What do you think we might be seeing with Elrond this season?
I mean, I mentioned it when we did the kind of first space about the trailer, and my first thought was that I was really happy to see him involved in some more action scenes. I feel like his presence in season 1 was very gentle and kind, and it was the Elrond we all know and love. He is very much as kind as summer, and I think Robert Aramayo played that role to a T in season 1. I feel like what we're going to see in season 2 is kind of his relationship with Galadriel, his friendship with her progressing, but at the same time I think that she will be influencing him quite a lot as well, because we talk about the influence that Gil-galad and Círdan may have on him. What I don't think we talk about enough is the influence that Galadriel has on him, because down the line she literally will eventually be his mother-in-law. So for one, it's going to be interesting to kind of see that relationship develop. And I know that there are a few people who think that Celebrimbor might appear in this season, and I do hate to break it to them, but I don't think that that's a possibility at all.
That is peak delusion, and I admire it. Listen, it's great, but it is delusion.
Yeah, it is peak delusion. But yeah, it looks like we're going to kind of see Elrond follow this path with Galadriel, and we'll talk about kind of Gil-galad and Círdan a bit more later. But it makes me wonder kind of how scaled back their presence this season will be, because he does seem to be kind of going off on his own adventure with Galadriel. And I'm just excited to see where it goes. I think one of the strongest aspects of season 1 was Elrond and the relationships he forged with the other characters. Elrond and Durin were a lot of people's highlight of season 1. We got some really, really nice moments between him and Celebrimbor too. So I wonder if they'll interact at all this season, especially if we have this potential dream sequence, potential real life moment between Galadriel and Celebrimbor. It makes me wonder if Elrond will be there with them as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I really liked what you said about Galadriel having an influence on his character, because one of, I think, the most telling lines in season 1 was when Galadriel said to Elrond, you have not seen what I have seen. And I think what we're going to see in season 2 is the kind of culmination of that, of Galadriel taking Elrond almost under her wing, much like his mother's wing, and say, sorry.
I knew you were going to say that.
I know, can never resist a "my dad's a star and my mum's a bird" joke. But I think what we're going to see is that transformation in Elrond's view of the world into a bit more mature, a bit more realistic, a bit darker. And I think as part of that, it's again what I talked a lot about last season, is this idea Robert Aramayo brought up, that Elrond doesn't really belong. He's half elf, he's half man, he's the only one of his kind. He's not a lord of anywhere yet. He's the herald of Gil-galad, but that role is not a really defined role in a traditional sense. His best friend is a dwarf, and yet he also he clearly looks up to people like Galadriel and Celebrimbor. There's a lot of admiration for both those characters. And so I think what's most interesting is I don't really mind what he's doing plot-wise. Obviously, like you said, he's going to be doing a lot of fighting. He's going to be with Galadriel, whether it's in that scene where they're surrounded by all those shades, whether it's the scene of him leading the cavalry into battle or fighting on foot. He's clearly going to, as Elrond does in the books, he's going to come to the aid of Celebrimbor at Eregion. And it'll be interesting to see how they play that out. But I think the more interesting part is, what does it do to him as a man, in inverted commas? Like, how does it make him grow up and develop?
Yeah, and there's one thing that I've seen, and we kind of have this feeling that Elrond is going to lead the charge to help out at Eregion. Seen this thing, there's a very small snippet of Durin giving what looks like a very powerful speech, and a lot of people have theorized that that is to go in aid of Elrond. So whether Elrond goes personally to appeal to him, whether he just kind of hears what's happening through the grapevine, I would like this idea of those two reuniting in that way. They were such a big part of season one, and I would love to see some sort of interaction between the two, even in such dire circumstances as literally helping save Eregion from Annatar. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who, he was a standout to many in season one, but even a few people who said, not that they didn't care for Elrond, but that he wasn't kind of anything special to them.
They're wrong.
His design, they're wrong for one, but a lot of them have kind of said that even from the few shots they've got of him this season, like, everything they've seen about him just appeals to them more. So it's kind of the armor, his wig has changed, he just looks so much more present this season, I think.
Point of note, a lot of people have been talking about the wig. I would like to tell them all, and this is a fact I've had confirmed to me by someone close to the production. Robert Aramayo was not wearing a wig in season one, and he's not wearing a wig in season two. It's just the way they're styling his hair, and maybe he's let it go a little bit darker. But neither of those are wigs. That's his natural hair. And yes, they might have, added a little bit here and there, like they've done with lots of characters. But that is genuinely Robert Aramayo's hair in both seasons.
So Robert Aramayo is the "Do you wear wigs?" No, I do not. Wow.
You have, can I just say, Anna, you have one joke, and it's that, and you just redeploy it in various circumstances.
Actually, I have two jokes. It's that and Viggo Mortensen breaking his toes. And you know what? It works every time, and it makes me laugh.
Yeah,
it makes me chuckle.
Got you nearly 50,000 Twitter followers repeating the same two jokes. Listen, if it works.
I stick with what I know.
Yeah, no, it works. Listen, I agree with everything you said there. And I think I'll maybe come back to the Durin thing later, because there's an interesting thing about that in terms of how they might interpret the text. But it kind of plays into his father. So we'll save that for a section on Khazad-dum. Let's turn to Gil-galad, because I remember when we were kind of doing our last episode for season one, when we were doing our episode 8 review, you were saying how much you'd really enjoyed Benjamin Walker's portrayal of Gil-galad, how, you thought people were a bit harsh on it. And actually, while he had a limited amount to do, he really played this role of the imposing king trying to be a peacetime king, but with, it's that whole thing Benjamin Walker talks about, where he's trying to play the peacetime king, but he keeps, the nuclear bomb behind him, which is his ability to go to war. And so it's very interesting. We didn't see much of him in the trailer. Obviously, we got the few snippets in the behind the scenes. He's sporting a new haircut, got a bit of an undercut going on, got a braid, new outfits as well. I mean, what do you make of what we've seen of Gil-galad, and where do you think they might go with him this season?
I was kind of gutted at first about how little we saw of him, but that was just from the sense of he was one of my favourites in season one, and I wanted to see more of him. It was the same, I think, that I felt about Elendil, was that I wanted to see him in the trailer so badly. But I kind of stepped back after watching the trailer, and I realised why they weren't in there. There were different characters that needed to be centred in the trailer, and I completely understand that. I'm glad that we kind of got glimpses of them, and I think we got more of Gil-galad in the behind-the-scenes footage. And again, the same for Númenor, I think. And I'm happy with what we saw. You know, we have that clip of him. We assume being told the news of Annatar, Halbrand, Adar, something like that. So we might see this transition. As you said, you know, he was this kind of peacetime ruler, or he was trying to be, and we're going to see this transition to war. And the one thing we said in our hopes for season 2 was Gil-galad covered in blood. We haven't got that yet, but listen, I have high hopes. But you know, like I said, it's the same with Círdan, I think, because we were quite anticipating seeing him. And listen, we got a hand shot, and can a girl ask for much more than a hand shot? But
Is
makes
that the phrasing you want to use?
I think that sounds normal.
Yeah, no. What can a girl ask for but a hand shot? Sure. I mean, if you're comfortable with that, Anna, so am I, and I'm sure our listeners are comfortable with that too. Do you want me to edit that out? I don't think I will.
You do what you want to do, Harry. Everyone who with a normal, clear mind like myself will just carry on as normal.
Sure.
But yeah, it makes me wonder if kind of Círdan and Gil-galad will have a similar role that Celebrimbor had in season 1, where they're there and they're present, but they're very much in the background. They're supporting characters. You know that they're going to be important in the long run. You know, by the time we get to season 5, they'll be very much kind of main players. But right now, they might just kind of be on the back burner, supporting the rest of the characters. You know, the ones who need to be centered this season.
Yeah, I think especially with Gil-galad, it's difficult for me to... I mean, they've deliberately not shown as much of what he's going to be doing, so one of two options there. Either, again, he's not going to have much screen time, or 2, he is, but they're deliberately hiding what he's going to be up to. And I've seen people speculate that in that nighttime shot from the behind the scenes where we see some elven riders riding up to what looks like a settlement, you can kind of see the base of a tower and the front of a building. I've seen a lot of people speculate that might be Mithlond, so Gil-galad and maybe Galadriel going to see Círdan, which would be interesting. I too hope we see him covered in blood. I would be surprised if they missed the opportunity to have him involved in the battle. Yes, in the books, he's less involved than some people might expect, kind of pre-Last Alliance, and the way they've compressed the timeline, it's difficult to see. But they didn't have him carry around Eyegloss in episode 8, his giant spear, to then not have them use it. So I think that's encouraging. But I think the most interesting part will be his relationship with Círdan, as we kind of talked about on our hopes for season 2. I really hope they lean into that idea of Círdan being a senior figure to Gil-galad, and so while Gil-galad is still the king, he turns to Círdan for advice, and he respects his wisdom, and he wants to seek his counsel. I think you're right, though. I don't expect Círdan to get a lot of screen time in season 2, but as we talked about before, I'm kind of okay with that because, listen, we got 3 more seasons.
Yeah, I agree. I really like your point about kind of him and his relationship with Círdan, because while we didn't get much of him in season 1, you know, the scenes that we did get were very much Elrond seeking out Gil-galad's counsel. And I think it will be nice to see Gil-galad, you know, as he's grappling with this move into wartime and all of these things he has to do. You know, if Galadriel tells him about Halbrand, you know, he has to deal with the fact that Sauron was also right under his nose. So it will be nice to see him have these kind of moments of vulnerability where he turns to this figure in his life instead, because, you know, what we've seen of him so far is this very stoic and stern high king. So it'll be nice to see the kind of softer moments with him. And, you know, as you said, I am a lover of Benjamin Walker's performance in season 1. I think he caught a lot of flack. There were the various differing opinions about his performance, but as I said, he wasn't given much to work with, but he did the best with what he got. And I think he played the Grand High King in the best possible way. You know, you can't play a role like that half-heartedly. He gave it everything, and I think it really paid off. So I'm excited to see how he plays the kind of more vulnerable side, but at the same time, he has to balance it out with this stoic king, which is how he's going to kind of present himself to his subjects. So I'm really excited to see that.
And I remember we talked about last year, and I even did a Twitter thread, God, this is nearly like 2 years ago, because when people complain about it, I said, you do realise, across all of Tolkien's writings, Gil-galad's name comes up like 100 times. That's it. And most of them, we don't know. It doesn't tell us anything about what his personality was, his style of his style of being a king. We mainly just get, a list of things he did and who he interacted with and the battles he fought. So I think that is particularly interesting to me. Obviously, briefly returning to the idea of Annatar and Eregion, in the books, obviously, we know that Gil-galad rejects Sauron's advances as Annatar, and then Sauron uses that as a little bit of leverage against Celebrimbor, saying wise is Gil-galad, but he doesn't want my help. Why would you not want my help? You surely want my help, aren't I handsome? And so it'll be interesting to see if they have Gil-galad interact with Sauron in his Annatar form. I'm fascinated whether they'll do that or whether that'll be delegated through Elrond and Galadriel in that sense. But I think the last thing I'll say on it is, you were talking about getting to see his softer side. There's one scene in particular from season 1 where I think we got to see these two extreme sides of Gil-galad, not all of them, but just kind of poking through the surface. And it's the scene where he's trying to convince Elrond to tell him about the Mithril. And you see in that scene both the kind of bubbling ferocity and anger where he's kind of laying into Elrond like he is his father, almost telling him what's what, where he's saying, you would risk all of your people for, your friendship and your oath and your word. But then he shows that softer side with his point about hope never being mere, even when it's meager. And so I think it was, in a way, it was quite a subtle performance. And what I expect this season is he might be allowed to break out, not often, because you still want him to be the stoic High King, but I think we might see that more ferocious side come out when it comes to Sauron and what happens to Eregion. And I think we might see more of that softer side if he goes to Círdan for advice. So I agree. I'm very excited there.
And that kind of hope is never mere, Elrond, even when it's meager. One of my favourite quotes from the whole of season 1. But yeah, before we move on from kind of Gil-galad, Elrond, Círdan, the last thing I want to say is that Elrond in Middle-earth has his fair share of father issues. However, the most supportive dad in the whole world has to go to Robert Aramayo's dad, Mike.
Yes.
It makes me so happy. He's the most positive, supportive person I've ever seen in my life. Every tweet he sees about Elrond, he is there. He's the number one fan, and it's just the cutest thing in the whole world. And I'm very glad that he has that support around him.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't on Twitter or don't know this, Rob's dad is on Twitter, and when stuff comes out about the show, he'll often retweet it, or sometimes he'll just tweet Elrond, which is so great. And as I know they're both big Leeds United fans, I'm hopeful that I don't really have any desire to interview any of the cast, because I'm quite happy sitting on the outside. But if I did, I would ask Robert Aramayo what position Elrond would play in football, and that's why I shouldn't be allowed to interview anyone, basically, because that's the kind of
that's why you should be allowed. I think that's
so?
that's the type of the journalism we need at the moment.
Exactly, you're right. Real substantive stuff. Okay, We think we've covered everything to the elves. I know people will say, you didn't talk about this, you didn't talk about that. Listen, guys, this is going to be 3 hours long. There are many other podcasts I'm sure you can listen to. If we miss something, do tell us and we'll cover it at a future day, or I'll cover it in a standalone episode. But before we finish, we've talked a lot about Galadriel in relation to Eregion and whether she's going to reveal, or when she's going to reveal, that Halbrand was Sauron. But obviously a big part of the trailer is seeing her, looks like mainly outside of Eregion, fighting, firing a bow, riding places. I know we talked already about that scene with Celebrimbor, so maybe let's focus on what she's going to be doing outside of Eregion. Clearly, she's not going to be, as Elrond suggested, putting up her sword. Rather, it seems like she's going to be redoubling her efforts.
Yeah, I mean, there's this quote from Morvith saying that Galadriel is being driven more by a bigger purpose. And I think that's something we talked about in our hopes, was that she wouldn't kind of end up back at square one, after the betrayal by Sauron / Halbrand. It had the chance to kind of reduce her back to where she started, but I'm glad that they've kind of used it just to continue this arc through to season 2. And it'll be nice to see her kind of realize that she has that support now. She's got Elrond to take on this journey with her. Whether or not we'll see Celeborn, who knows? But I'm team. I hope we're not going to see him this season. I'm sorry to say it. Not to you, because I think you agree with me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, we talked about it a lot on our last episode, so we won't rehash it, but I think we both kind of agreed, it will be great when she reunites with Celeborn, but equally, there's so much they can still do with her pre-sack of Eregion that will be really interesting. And I think one of the things, because as I said earlier in this episode, the show really likes to do parallels and rhymes. And one of them I think they're going to do is in episode 1 of season 1, we had that scene where her company basically defies her orders and says, we're not doing this anymore. This is ridiculous. You're clearly not making rational decisions. And they lay down their weapons. And I saw some people describing that as her being betrayed. I don't think it's her being betrayed. I think it's just her being, kind of almost reminded that she isn't a tyrant who can order her soldiers about without limit. But she's clearly got a new company this time with Elrond and I think the 4 other elves we saw in the trailer. And so I think what we're going to see, and we talked about this a lot last season, a big part of her character arc in the show is clearly going to be her moving from being a sort of lone wolf to being a leader. And I think we're going to see a very different style of leadership from her this season. And I think, yes, she's still going to be desperate to pursue Sauron and stop him. But as you said, Morvith's quote from that behind the scenes made it very clear. She's more interested in connecting with Middle-earth, connecting with the other peoples, and yes, stopping Sauron, but doing that, again, not in a way that isolates her, but connects her to everyone else.
I think it'll be interesting to see, and then, we'll talk about Isildur a bit later on. Actually, I think we might talk about him next when we go into kind of Mordor and the Southlands. But I think it will be interesting to see, because I feel like Isildur and Galadriel this season are going to connect with Middle-earth in different ways. And in a sense, they're almost going on a similar journey of having to learn to lead. They're both at this kind of very early stage in their life. Isildur a lot more than Galadriel. But it'll be interesting to see how their journeys kind of parallel each other, because essentially they are going through the same thing almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because you always have to remind yourself that Galadriel is old. Like, she has been, as we saw in season 1, she has been awake since the 2 trees. She was obviously she was obviously one of the Noldor that made the journey to Middle-earth post the theft of the Silmarils and the destruction of the 2 trees and the exile of the Noldor. So she has this long history. And obviously the show can't go into all of that. But I think one of the things they did really well in season 1 was kind of showing the weight of the world on her shoulders, that grief and loss she feels about her family and even Celeborn, who she thinks is gone. The desire to make amends for what has gone wrong, and that sense of the righteousness of fighting evil. And I think people way too often, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode when talking about her and telling Celebrimbor about Halbrand and Sauron, but I think there's a genuine misconception that she made a bunch of mistakes in season 1. She didn't really make mistakes. She was just taking the wrong approach. But it mainly, she wasn't the one that caused Mordor to be born, because if the elves and Númenorians don't arrive, then Adar still gets the key to Mordor. Nothing changes with that. People really misinterpret that plotline and the reason is, which I think is fascinating, is because in episode 7, when Galadriel's talking to Theo, she basically says this was her fault, but she's wrong. She's just in a very damaged place where she's hurting, she's feeling the loss, she's seen yet more death and destruction. No, I'm not saying all her actions were right or all her methods were right. Absolutely not. It's very clear she was blinded by her grief and her loss and her anger. But part of that journey of healing is about realizing she can't save everyone herself. And so it's not I think it's wrong when people ascribe this level of just this idea that she committed some grave crimes in season 1, because I think it's rubbish.
I agree. I don't think I could say it any better than that. And I think the only thing that I have to add on to that is that the one person that we can blame for the kind of creation of Mordor is, in fact, Waldreg himself.
You're right. We
the
can
man of
blame.
The hour.
Exactly. We can blame Waldreg all day. The guy who's just climbing the career ladder like no one else. But I suppose that we've now talked about Eregion and Sauron for an hour. We've talked about the elves for another 20 minutes. Let's move on to Mordor, Sauron, Adar, what's going on there. But before we get into that, we have to address the elephant in the room of flashbacks, because I tweeted the day the trailer, I think it was the day the trailer came out and then the day after, that shot of the black goo reforming, that almost looked like a humanoid figure. There's a bit where if you pause it, you can almost see a kind of head shape and some teeth, and then right at the end of the trailer, if you pause it, we get a shot of blinding white light, And in that, if you pause at the right time, you can see that it looks like the interior of the forge workshop that Galadriel found in the Forodwaith in, I think it was called Durnost, is what they called that fortress that was supposedly Sauron's. And then we cut to a wide shot of, as I called it, the frozen transition of the fortress, exploding outwards, the snow and frost covering everything. So my theory is that we are going to get a flashback. And let's not forget, the opening shot of the trailer is Sauron in Halbrand form, but definitely wearing clothes that he isn't wearing post Eregion, at the end of season 1. So I think, as we discussed, I think we even said, is it necessary? No, but would we like to see it? A flashback to how Sauron ended up on the raft? I mean, you tell me, but I think we're going to see Sauron in the Forodwaith, Adar killing him, even though clearly he didn't kill him. We're going to see him reforming into his Halbrand body. Maybe we're going to find out whether his actual spirit being released from his body temporarily, maybe that has something to do with the blight of the linden trees. If he's in this black goo form, are they trying to connect that? All the way up to, I think, how he ends up on that raft. But what did you think of those hints? And are you excited to kind of get that flashback?
I mean, yeah, I was very much in the park of, I wouldn't be mad if they didn't flash back, if they didn't give us that information, but it would kind of benefit the story quite a lot if they do. I mean, I like what we've seen of the darker kind of horror-y elements of the season 2 trailer so far, and I think they have a very good opportunity. Sauron is in Maiar. There's so many elements at his disposal, and I think there's so much like kind of body horror that they could do with this reformation of his body. I mean, we've already seen it with that black goo, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was there a kind of director, at least last season, who had sort of like a horror background?
Yes, J.A. Bayona, who directed episode 1 and 2. He directed, I think it's a Spanish film. I think it's called El Orfanato. It's basically the orphanage, or the orphan. Can't remember which one it is. But he's got a horror background. I don't know about, because obviously in terms of directors, Charlotte Brandstrom is returning. She's doing 4 episodes, which I'm very excited about. She did 6 and 7 last season. We've got Louise Hooper and Sana Hamri, who are 2 new directors. I don't know if any of them have got horror backgrounds, but as we discussed right at the start of this episode, there is a darker vibe to this trailer, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get some very horror vibes here.
Yeah, and I do really like that, because it is quite a horrific concept, like the idea that you can kind of shape and form your body into absolutely anything you want it to. And I think we discussed this probably earlier on this podcast, but obviously it was yesterday. But this idea of, there's a debate of whether Sauron was repentant, and people have that debate with him in Halbrand form. Was he genuinely trying to be kind of a better man? Did he just want to be a regular person in season 1? Me and you are very much on the side of no. The whole thing was calculated. It was manipulative. There's a reason that he chose the form he did. He wanted something out of that form, and I would like to see the kind of psychology, or just like the moment behind why he chose Halbrand. It was such a specific form to take, when he can literally kind of transform his body into anything he wants. So I would kind of like to see why it's that, out of all things. It could literally just be because he's the actor they chose. They don't really have any other reason except for that. But I'd like to see maybe some kind of psychology behind that, at least.
Well, I think there could be 2 explanations as well. One, which is kind of more, I guess, in the like metaphysical lore basis, which could be like, well, after Adar, stabs him, does whatever he does to him to cause him to have to, reform his body. Could be that he's gathering his strength, so he can't at that point imitate at one of the Eldar, one of the elves, and he can't take an angelic form, so he takes the form of a man, because that's what he's capable of in his weakened state. Or I think it could be, as we found out in season 1, in the show's lore, Mordor was a plan from the First Age. It was a long-held plan to create a kingdom should Morgoth fall, basically for Sauron. And so I wonder whether it's the case that after what happens in the frozen wastes, he flees south, he flees to Mordor, because that's where he always planned to go if things went wrong. And obviously he discovers the Southlanders living there. and that's why he chooses to take human form. That's a possibility too. But like you say, I wonder whether there is more of a scheme about it, and as you said, some psychology behind why he'd do that.
Even just kind of the specific look and personality he chooses, maybe you're right that he kind of chooses a human man because that's all he can kind of muster up. But why Halbrand? Did he kind of tailor his personality, his look specifically to Galadriel? It doesn't seem like it because they don't get off on very good
No.
terms. So it could be, it probably won't get explained, but it would be quite nice to see kind of if he starts off in that form, or if the Halbrand personality kind of is something he kind of develops and learns from the other Southlanders, something that he kind of picks up along time. Probably not something that we'll get, because I doubt they'll dedicate that much time to pre-raft, but you never know.
Although, I mean, it's interesting as well that, there's the question of, and we won't spend too much more time on this because we're getting into just kind of the theory crafting with no evidence part, but there is the potential as well that the flashback starts in the First Age, that it starts in Valinor, like we saw with Galadriel. It's possible we see him kind of, I think it would be in more of a, similar to how they showed the Balrog in the story of the roots of the Hithaglir, where it's more painterly. But it's possible they could show his fall to Morgoth, his a brief shot of him in the First Age, leading Morgoth's armies, maybe even him in Tol Gauroth when he captures Finrod. That would be wild if they brought Finrod's actor back to show that. I don't think they'll do all that. But again, there's the potential that they could use this as a very kind of direct parallel to Galadriel's prologue from season 1. Yeah. But let's talk about what he's going to be doing post that. Because in the trailer, we obviously see the shot from season 1, episode 8, where he's walking atop the cliffs into Mordor. And then in the behind the scenes, we do get a few shots and a brief bit where Charlie's talking to camera, where he's in Halbrand form. And he looks quite beat up. He's got a busted lip. He's looking quite dirty and bedraggled. In another shot from the behind the scenes, he's riding a horse through what looks like the Southlands. So I'm kind of fascinated. And we know so little, but I am incredibly fascinated by what the first things we're going to see with his return to Mordor. Is it going to be him coming across an orc and, him at first struggling with the orc because he's still in his human form, and then he kind of unleashes the power within himself? Or is it going to be that he gets brought before Adar and that's when he reveals himself? Because obviously we had that fantastic line in season 1 where he says, "Remember me?" and Adar just goes, "No." And so we could kind of get a redux of that. But do you have any thoughts on how his reintroduction to Mordor might happen?
I think I think the relationship between him and Adar will be very interesting this season. We've talked about it numerous times at this point, that there's a reason that Adar was recast, and it's because he has a role to play in this season. And I think that most of that will be to kind of play with the Siege of Eregion at the end. There needs to be a reason that Halbrand Annatar is able to get into Eregion almost unnoticed, whether that is him kind of changing his shape, whether it is just him keeping the elves distracted with Adar. I think that he will be used to keep kind of Gil-galad and his forces very much distracted, their eyes away from Eregion while he works on Celebrimbor. So I think that a little bit of time needs to be focused on him and Adar developing that relationship, because, in season 1, Adar is very much the main player in Mordor. He is kind of the main villain there. He's the father of the orcs, and he has kind of that role at the top. There is that hierarchy, and Adar is right there at the top. So I wonder if he'll be very reluctant to kind of relinquish that role to Sauron when he turns up, especially if he's turning up in the form of a man. And because Adar, has this elven kind of blood within him. So whether he sees himself as kind of superior in that respect, I'm not sure. It'll be interesting because there'll definitely be some sort of power struggle. I think Adar will be reluctant to give up that power, especially to someone who will not treat the orcs with the same respect that Adar will. He sees them mainly as servants, we know that, but also as his children. So for someone to come in and disregard them in the way that Sauron absolutely will, we know that he's going to have no respect for them or their lives or anything. I think that will be just a really interesting thing to watch play out, and I do think that will happen within the first few episodes.
Yeah, I think if you want, this is just a theory I've literally come up while sitting here listening to you talk. So you framed it in such an interesting way. This is just going to be my wild card theory that I'm going to throw out, and then in 4 months' time or whatever it is, we can come back and see if I was right. Here's what I think is going to happen based on those shots of him being bloodied in the trailer. I think he rides into Mordor. I think he gets set upon by orcs and he lets them capture him. Because as we see in the behind the scenes, there are scenes where the orcs are capturing human prisoners probably to work in their, whether it's like we saw in season 1, chopping down trees, or maybe they'll put them to work making armor for them, that sort of stuff. They'll basically be used as slave labor. Let's be clear about that. And again, reminds me of my point when I tell people Adar isn't a nice guy. He's more sympathetic, but he's not a nice guy. So I think Halbrand, in inverted commas, is going to let himself captured and say, bring me to Adar. And he's going to be brought before him, and Adar's going to be like, why would you return, king of the Southlands? And I literally think we're going to get a scene where, like, Sauron breaks his chains, stands up. It's a bit cheesy, so they probably won't do it, but that's how I do it, because I am cheesy. He, like, breaks his chains, stands up, draws himself to his full height, maybe even transforms into his first age form that we might see in a prologue, and basically says, you thought you'd kill me, and I'm back, baby. And it's going to terrify the ever-loving shit out of the orcs, and Adar is not going to have a choice. And I think we might even see, when Adar kind of chokeslammed Waldreg, how good would it be if we saw Sauron do that to Adar as this kind of role reversal, not literally, but that kind of dominant position. So that's my little fan theory I've come up with in the last 2 minutes, but maybe it's just a little silly.
No, I like that. It's cheesy, but I think it's a good cheesy. And I think that a lot of people forget in the kind of rise of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, which, don't get me wrong, I love both of those shows, flaws and all. I think people forget that fantasy is supposed to be a little bit cheesy and a little bit whimsical.
Yes.
And that's part of the charm. When things like that happen, you can suspend your disbelief. It's supposed to be like that, it's supposed to be a little bit cheesy and a little bit silly. And Lord of the Rings is at times, but I think that's why a lot of people love it, and I think we should have more things like that in it. And I do think that will happen, They need to have this moment where Sauron properly takes over from Adar. And listen, I'm just going to mention it now because I need to get it off my chest. From what I've seen so far of the new Adar, I'm not sold yet. And listen, I did try and come into this with an open mind, and I will stay that way. I've not completely written him off. But at the moment, it just feels to me like they've tried too hard to kind of dress someone up exactly like last season's Adar. And it feels like too much of that to me, and I don't know if I'm completely sold on it yet. Even the quote that we got in the trailer, it just, something about it doesn't feel quite right to me, and I don't know if that's just because I'm too set on the performance that we had last season. And I'm willing to have my mind changed. I'm hoping that I do. I've got every faith in Sam. I'm not too fond of what we got from the trailer, especially just kind of the main shot we got of him, unsheathing his sword. Something about that shot just didn't feel quite right to me.
What do I think about that? You're wrong. No, I'm joking. I think that's a perfectly valid position to have, and I get that. Listen, I thought the performance in season 1 was very good, and obviously we know now, well, I'm not going to get into it, but anyway, Joseph was replaced for reasons, and it was always going to be a struggle because people loved Adar. People thought he was a great character. People thought the performance was great, and I agree with all that. So I've got no complaints there. What do I think about you? Let's take his appearance first. I think they're in a very difficult position, and since you brought up Game of Thrones, I'll give you a comparison. When Game of Thrones recast Dario Naharis from Ed Skrein to Michael Huisman, I think is his name, or Huisman, whatever his name is. But basically what they did was, Dario Naharis in the Song of Ice and Fire books is unbelievably flamboyant. He's got like blue hair and a forked beard, and he's very over the top, and he's this sellsword, and he's all this and that. And Ed Skrein, costume-wise, he didn't have that, but there was something a little bit, kind of Conan the Barbarian, kind of 80s fantasy. And then they recast him with Michael, and Michael just looks like he's walked out of any American rom-com. And
Yeah.
like that's how they then played that story with Daenerys for the rest of Game of Thrones. And for me, it never worked because I was like, no, you've made him too much of like this nice, handsome guy who just loves the queen. And it's like, no, he's this braggart sellsword who, yeah, he's kind of obsessed with the queen, but also he's kind of obsessed with himself. So you can go that route where you like change the appearance, change the characters so that people kind of go, oh well, never mind. What they've clearly tried to do is say, listen, people really liked this character and specifically the way this character is portrayed. And so I think what they've tried to do is maintain some level of continuity. And I think naturally that will lead to some jarring because, like you said, with the prosthetics and the makeup, they look fairly similar, but I get what you mean. It can almost be a little bit uncanny valley because of that.
Yeah.
I think that shot that we saw, I think it's particularly unflattering. It's firelight. It's a very tight shot on his face, by the way. He's almost directly looking into camera. It's firelight. He's almost growling clearly because they're about to go into battle. And so I think we might just be seeing a more feral version of Adar that we didn't see in the first season. I think some of the behind the scenes shots of him, like there's a great shot which I think plays into the flashback where he's wearing a cloak and it's all snowy. Yeah. And in that moment, I genuinely had a moment where I was like, oh, that's Joseph. And I was like, no, it's not, it's Sam. And so I thought he looked better there. And he kind of, even his posture, he kind of looked stooped and hunched and tired. Like Joseph kind of played him this kind of world-weary elf.
Yeah.
On the voice, I completely disagree with you. That line gave me chills. And yes, it's not exactly the same voice, obviously, because he's a different person playing him. But I love the way he delivered that. So if he's going to keep, it's obviously a very similar voice he's doing. It's quite raspy, quite breathy, very almost that kind of quiet menace. So I don't have the same problems you do completely, but I also understand that you and many others are going to have the same problem because fundamentally this is what happens with recasts, isn't it? You can't.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm gonna keep a completely open mind because we've not seen a lot of him at all, and I think that's my issue with it is that we've got these kind of very broken up shots, and then this one voiceover that, admittedly, I'm not too fond of. I'm not completely sold on that line delivery like you are. So I've just kind of got these kind of mismatched little parts of him, plus this kind of separated dialogue. It's not too much to go on, and I understand I'm being very quick to judge, which I do tend to tell other people off for. So I'm gonna give it time. We're gonna get more content from him. I think that's the problem. They made such a good and memorable character in season 1. It's like how do you go about getting that same kind of magnetism and just how do you replicate that in season 2 with someone else? And it's a good comparison to Game of Thrones, I think, because I think it fully just depends on how the character is played, not who is playing them. So my reservations I'll put to the side for now, and I'll just wait and see.
Do you know what the other thing as well is? Let me put it this way. The reason Adar was such a good character in season 1 was, yes, because of the performance, but really it was because the way he was written, the dialogue he was given, the type of character he is, this idea of being one of the first elves to be corrupted into an orc. But anyway, yeah, it was the way he was written. And I think the test will be when we see Adar, whether it's with orcs, with Waldreg, with Sauron, how is that written? And I think what they should do is avoid the Game of Thrones thing of changing the way he's written. Yeah. Like, people will move past the recast. They always do. The point is to keep the consistency with the writing. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think, and maybe this is the last thing I'll kind of talk with you about on Adar, is I don't think he's going to stay the same as a character because obviously he's going to be dealing with Sauron's return. Clearly Sauron is going to impose his dominion. Is he going to do it out of, we talked about this on our last episode, is he going to be doing it out of fear, out of willingness, out of, whatever reason? But also I get the feeling that, obviously Adar is going to be deployed to lead the attack on Eregion in some capacity. Is he going to be happy about that? Is he going to be given an incentive to do it by Sauron? So for me, there's a fascinating opportunity for them to develop his character even further than it was at the end of season 1.
I agree. It's mainly about the consistency for me. It's like if I turn on episode 1 and there's this kind of really jarring moment where it's very clearly not the same person and it's very clearly not the same character, it's like you said, that the reason that a lot of people, and myself included, really enjoyed Adar in season one is because he felt very grounded within Tolkien. He felt like a character that Tolkien himself could have written. You know, a lot of the things he was saying and a lot of the kind of morality that he explored just felt so Tolkien. And if they continue that through season two, kind of continue this kind of struggle that he has, using the elves as servants whilst kind of still caring about them and seeing them as these sentient beings with hearts. If they continue that on whilst kind of balancing this struggle that he has with Sauron on the side, I'm gonna keep myself slightly optimistic for it. I've got faith.
And then maybe let's spare a moment for our achiever of season one, you know, the guy who climbed the corporate ladder better than anyone else, you know, the Sauron simp in chief, Waldreg, who went from lonely, innkeeper to almost right hand to Waldreg, you know, proclaiming all hail Adar, you know, at the end of, episode 7. This is going to be, like, I know a lot of people are going to laugh and say, why do you care about this character? I think he's an interesting character because he will almost be our viewpoint into this dynamic between Sauron and Adar, because he's almost he's the audience. Obviously, he's got the added thing of he was so excited about Sauron's return. And I think when he sees the real Sauron, I tweeted today, he's going to be like Stilgar in Dune 2, you know, listen al Gaib every 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes. So I think,
you know what, I do think, because the situation with Sauron and Adar is obviously going to be very tense. There's a lot of morality and power dynamics to explore there. I think they've got the chance to use Waldreg as a very nice but subtle comedic relief in that sense, because he is going to be kind of mesmerized by Sauron. So I'd quite like to see how that plays out. And just Waldreg's character in general makes me laugh because, you know, it's like when, say I'm rewatching like The Return of the King, it just makes me laugh that within the Rings of Power canon, the kind of Mount Doom that Sam and Frodo are kind of climbing up, Mordor that everyone is charging on, is there because of Waldreg.
Yep.
It really makes me laugh. I love it.
It's so good because it's like it's the mundane, isn't it? It's always nice in fantasy to have like that odd drop of the mundane. It's the same thing as the hobbits going to the prancing pony and everything being too big for them, and you're like, it's not, no one cares about that. Like that's not an important thing, but it's having that aspect of the mundane where you go, oh yeah, this is. You know, even in a fantasy world, there is like someone's got to turn the key to release the dam to get the water to the volcano. Like someone's got to do it. You know, someone physically has to do it. So it's one of those things. But I genuinely think it will be interesting to see where his loyalties lie. And listen, I don't think he's making it to the end of season 2 alive, but I think it will be interesting. And I wonder as well whether Sauron will use him. Because obviously we know Sauron in the books, he doesn't just lead orcs, he leads men, and we suspect we're going to see Sauron, you know, try to convert more of the Southlanders or go down to Pelargir, wherever he might be. Wonder whether he uses Waldreg in some way for that, so that could be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the good thing about the introduction of original characters in the show, is that there's just so much they can do with them, and they can weave them into kind of the show and the general story in so many ways. So I think it will be exciting. There's just so many new kind of character dynamics that we're going to explore this season. Almost too many. I don't think I'm going to be able to keep up with them all.
Yeah, and maybe the last thing we should say before we move on to our character who's not trying to go to Mordor, who's trying to escape from Mordor, which is, of course, Isildur. Yes. I do just want to take a second to say, listen, the prosthetics, the design, the costuming for the orcs in season 1 was incredible. But impeccable. Even just looking at season 2, I'm like, oh, they're so good. I mean, I'm not saying they're better than season 1. I just think they've kept such an incredibly high standard. Like I joked in the recap, the Fade-Raltha orc licking the knife is just so gnarly and gross. But I love the way they're designing the orcs still.
You know, it makes me laugh because one thing that was the same even in season 1 is that you had these people that hated the Rings of Power like ferociously. But the one thing they said was, you know what? The one thing we cannot fault is the use of practical effects. Yeah. Like they took a step back to be like, wow, that looks really good.
Yeah.
But it is, you know, I feel like people learned from the mistakes of The Hobbit in that the kind of more realistic, practical villains are always going to be the scariest, the kind of the most gruesome. They're going to feel the most grounded, and they just do it so well. You know, it's even like I'm not sure if he's back this season, but we had Jed Brophy back playing kind of some of the orcs last in season one. I don't know if
Yeah.
he's back in this season, but it's that thing of just having the actors kind of take on the role of the orcs, and you can feel that coming through, especially when you have characters like Adar, you know, humanizing them as well. I think it really helps in that aspect.
You know what it is, you make a great point about the Hobbit films. It's like I just had at a moment which just like chilled me to the bone, like imagining Peter Jackson taking on Adar and the orcs when he was making the Hobbit film, and you get a CGI Adar like Azog, and I just had like a chill go through my body, like, oh no, I don't want to see that. Yeah, it's a relief they've gone so
You try
far.
and have this heartfelt moment. You know when Adar's first introduced in season one, and he kind of he there's this dying orc, and he stabs it to kind of get it out of its pain quicker. Can you imagine that in CGI? There would be absolutely zero emotional value.
We basically got that in the Hobbit films, and I do not wish to return there. And I also just had that thought of like looking at the shots we did get of the Siege of Eregion, the orcs, the catapults, which we know from some leaked set photos, they really made some of these catapults, and they actually fired projectiles. So like they have gone all in on the practical effects, and we saw in the behind the
Actually,
scenes.
yeah, I mean, but
Sorry.
sorry, I'm gonna go all the way back to Eregion, even though we've kind of gone past that. But one of the things we've seen from behind the scenes is this kind of practical statue of Feanor, which we
Mm,
think Celebrimbor's kind of unveil. But you know, that was kind of built on obviously on kind of like a smaller scale. But it's just things like that, the kind of effort they're putting into those things that they could easily just CGI. It probably would be a lot easier to do that,
yeah.
but they're putting in the effort into the practical effects, and it does pay off. You know, a lot of people noticed it in season one.
Yeah, and like the siege in general, we saw, and we won't keep going back to this, but the behind the scenes video, you literally saw them like, cause they've obviously built these walls and a gate for Aegon, and you literally see bits where these machines of war, these siege weapons, are like tearing out chunks of the wall. And I'm just like, oh, I love that they're doing this, because nothing, not to drag, well, I promise we'll stop dragging the Hobbit films in a second, but nothing makes me feel more nauseous than remembering that scene where Peter Jackson had a CGI troll headbutt a wall. And then just like, oh God, it just, I don't like to, and to be clear, because I realize I rag on the Hobbit films quite a lot, can I tell you guys, I loved the first one, I quite liked the second one, and I was so hopeful for the third one. So it came out when I was in my second year at university. Me, my partner, my friends at the time, we went to a midnight screening of the Battle of the Five Armies. So you have to remember that it's like 2 a.m. and I'm seeing these CGI. I'm seeing Legolas run, defy gravity, running up boulders. I'm seeing like Alfred be a character that I have to see on screen. So you have to understand. Now, don't get me wrong. When Thorin died and Bilbo said, the Eagles are here, I still cried. Don't get me wrong. But it might have just been because it was 3 a.m. and my mind was broken. Anyway.
Listen, I get ragged on for this a lot, but the Battle of the Five Armies is my favorite Hobbit film, and I think it's solely for nostalgic reasons. I also saw it when it came out, but I was about 14 at the time, I
Yeah.
think. So I just I loved it, and it's just so, you know, when you can suspend your disbelief about how absolutely terribly it does the books, because listen, the Battle of the Five Armies is not a good book adaptation,
Yeah.
but if I kind of remove myself from that and just watch it as kind of a silly fantasy film, I love it. It's just so much fun for 3 hours. But if I do think too much about its relation to the actual Hobbit book, no, I don't like to talk about that,
Yeah.
because then I have to think about why it's actually a very bad film.
Listen, and to be clear, to our listeners who really like it, that's fine. I like stuff that other people don't like, and you don't need, what I would say is, you don't need my validation to enjoy something. If I've tried to say anything about the fact how we enjoy Rings of Power despite these, you know, kind of
Yes.
dedicated haters, is you don't need anyone else to validate you. You don't need critics to validate you. You don't need other people to validate you. You don't need influencers to validate you. If you enjoy something, enjoy it. Anyway, so ends the sermon. Let's return to Mordor and get back to Middle-earth's lost puppy, a small creature lost and alone in the wilds of Middle-earth. Isildur, hopefully to be joined by Beric at some point, boy, did we see some stuff with him. And I'll just kind of recap what we saw from him to remind people in the trailer and behind the scenes. We saw him in one shot in the trailer looking up, very, as I said, very concerned in a dark cave or something. We saw him next to some kind of cart, and Arondir does a big spin and a flip and arrives on the scene and draws his bow. So that looks like Arondir coming to save the day. And then in the behind the scenes, we saw quite a lot of stuff. We saw Isildur fighting, drawing a sword and being in a forest somewhere fighting. We saw him in a cave, which looked a bit spidery, if you asked me. And we get a shot of Isildur where of Maxim Baldry, who plays Isildur, standing in front of some storyboards. And if you zoom in on those storyboards, all I'll say, arachnophobes should probably look away, because it looks like Isildur's escape from Mordor is going to involve some eight-legged friends. I mean, Anna, where do we start with Isildur?
I mean, I'm just looking at the quotes from the behind-the-scenes footage now, and this part did make me laugh. Maxim Baldry says, "It's been a long wait. Some bad things might have happened. Some good things might have happened. And there's a lot of danger, a lot of excitement. But we're back in Middle-earth." Which, just great sentiment. We are back in Middle-earth. And I like how positive he's trying to be about it, because let's be honest, a lot of bad things have happened.
Yeah, what good things have happened? What good thing? When he said that, I was like, I've just watched that trailer. I have not, and especially not for you, Isildur. I have not seen a lot of good stuff happening to you. Like,
Isildur is in this very strange place, physically and mentally, during season 2. I mean, the first part is, how is he going to get out of Mordor? Because we saw him, that was the last place we saw him, he was kind of trapped. He's gonna have to deal with getting out of Mordor. Once that stress is over, he's done it. A lot of people hope that Beric is gonna come in and save the day. Once that's all over, he's then gonna have to deal with the fact that his family, who granted thought that he was dead, his family and friends left him in Middle-earth and sailed back to Númenor, because he's going to know that that's what happened. And he's going to have to kind of grapple with the fact that he was left behind, the fact that his first expedition out of Númenor failed. He watched one of his friends die as well. So all in all, Maxim, a lot of bad things happened. Not a lot of good things happened at all.
Exactly, yeah. I think there's, again, it's that we talked about this a little bit on our last episode about our hopes for season 2. Like, he is going to think his father and his people have abandoned him. And he might understand it, because he might think, you see him one shot, his sleeves all ripped, it looks like his arms burned. And I just got to say, I love the idea that Isildur is already going to be carrying scars, because I think much like Elrond, this season is going to be about him growing up. And so that being not just a mental thing, but physically, like his body taking a beating, taking scarring. And I think that is going to lean into this idea that Isildur is going to go through a real transformation this season. I mean, it's hard for me to ignore the fact that they are very heavily hinting that in order to escape from Mordor, he's going to have to go through the mountains, he's going to have to go through some caves, and he's going to have to probably run away from either Shelob or one of the other spiders that hang about in there. And I just think, on the one hand, I'm kind of like, because I know I've said before, I don't like when they reference the Peter Jackson films. On the other hand, am I going to be a complete sucker for Isildur being chased through a tunnel by a spider and having some jump scares with orcs, as we saw in the behind the scenes, some orcs strung up and suspended? Am I going to be a sucker for that horror imagery? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And listen, I'm not in the park of arachnophobia. I actually very much like spiders. I'm not one of those people who's scared of them. I understand where the fear comes from.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, it's a very good opportunity for horror, for scares. The kind of enwebbed shot of the orc that we got was so good. And I think, if I'm correct, Isildur was kind of like staring up at it. So I feel like we're going to have that moment where he's kind of on the run from Shelob or whatever spider it is. He turns around very quickly and there's just this kind of orc right in his face. So I think a very fast-paced scene like that will be really good. And I know we spoke to Beric the horse, not literally the Beric. we can't do that. He's fictional and also a horse. But we spoke to...
Thanks for explaining that to our audience.
But we spoke to our good friend Beric the horse on Twitter, who is hoping that the real Beric the horse will come and save Isildur from Shelob. Whether that will actually happen...
I'm sorry. It was the fact. It was the fact that you had to do the double clarification of because he's fictional and he's a horse. One of those is enough to stop us being able to talk to him. But I appreciate that you just wanted to make sure the audience understood there were several reasons we couldn't talk to the real.
Listen. We know from Aragorn, from the entire kind of place of Rohan, from Elendil and Isildur, that you can indeed talk to your horse. Okay.
Yeah,
that's something that you can do. The horse
sure.
might not talk back, but you can talk to your horse.
Listen, I maintain my position that horses don't have souls, but that's a conversation for another day. Listen, all I'm saying is if you've ever looked into the eyes of a horse, it's not a happy place. It's not a happy place, the eyes of a horse.
Maybe you're just seeing your own reflection.
Wow. Wow.
I'm serious when it comes to horses, okay?
Yeah, well, no, you're serious when it comes to horses because of Aragorn. I think we should... Listen, this is turning into a bickering session, and... sorry, to hand it back over to you, you were talking to our good friend Beric the Horse on Twitter.
I was, who seems very set on the fact that Beric is going to show up at some point to save Isildur. Whether we will ever see Beric again or not, I'm not too sure. But what do you think about the idea that he might come and kind of save the day and possibly get killed in the process, which would just be another huge blow for Isildur?
I don't think they're going to kill the horse. I think listen, here's my theory with this. It's just like films, TV shows, you never want to kill the dog, you never want to kill the horse, like, unless you're Game of Thrones. And, Game of Thrones, as much as I love the books and enjoyed the show, was guilty several times of just being like, oh, shock value, we shall kill another horse. When it was kind of like, well, the writers was like, look at they're watching, oh, haven't killed an animal in a few episodes. Better put a spear through a horse's neck. And then they're like, all right, done that one, on to the next. But no, so I don't think Beric is going to... I'm going to choose to be optimistic. I don't think Beric's going to die. I do think he's going to rescue him, but it's kind of interesting because if you think about where we left in Season 1, the Númenorians were almost camped outside of... I think they were camped on the far side of the pass leading into Mordor. And so Elendil releases him and he goes running off. Now, Isildur's going to wake up in Tir Harad, probably try and wander out of the village and then make his way towards the mountains. My question is he going to get the mountains before Beric, in which case they're going to go through that tunnel together? I don't think so. I think he's going to go into the tunnel. If you look at the storyboards, there's a couple of things you can identify. One, it looks like Isildur is going to be beating an orc to death with his bare hands, which is,
incredible.
Some people's idea of very erotic, other people's idea of a horror scene. So, listeners, let us know which camp you fall into. And then in the storyboards below, there was one storyboard where I was like, it was just one of these classic tropes of cinema where I was like, I know exactly what that shot is. It's blurry, but you can see it. There's a human head, so it's shot from behind. There's a head, and then there's just the end of, I don't know what the like technical term is for a spider's leg, but like the pinion at the end of the leg just coming into the frame. And so we're definitely going to get that behind shot of Isildur, like he's just beat an orc to death. He's panting. He's oh god, I'm exhausted. And then into the camera frame, we're going to see this one leg, and then he's going to turn around, and then we're going to get the Frodo Shelob scene, basically from Return of the King.
I guess that could even be what the kind of concerned look up is. He notices this kind of presence over his head, and it's like, oh god.
Yeah. And then I think basically he's going to run out the cave. He's going to run through the caves, and as he's lost, he can't find his way through the caves. And then he's going to hear a horse neighing away in the distance, and that neighing, he'll be like a bat, and he shall use the sound of the neighing to guide himself out of the tunnels, and he shall burst forth into daylight and see Beric, and he'll go, Beric, my boy, and then he'll leap onto him and run away, and we'll see Shelob or whatever spider in the background kind of chittering away and going, lust another one, and then she'll go back and eat her orcs, and that'll be the scene.
I think that would be absolutely incredible. And listen, it would make a lot of people on Twitter very, very, very happy.
Yeah. Anyway, they should hire me as a writer because I come up with such great scenes. So then obviously we see, and we'll transition this into talking about Arondir, Bronwyn, Theo, and Southlands. The other main shot we saw of him in the trailer is obviously him. Well, we see him fighting in the forest, and similarly in another forest we see Arondir appearing to come and save the day. They're by a cart. There's some other humans around, so clearly Isildur is going to link up with some other, whether they're other refugees from the Southlands, not from Tir Harad, obviously, but from somewhere else. Who knows? And they're going to get attacked by something, and Arondir is going to show up and save the day. So if there's more you want to say on Isildur, we can talk about that. Otherwise, we can talk about what Isildur and his found family are going to be up to this season.
No, I think the only other thing I have to say about Isildur, and I'm not going to go too much into it because I'm not too sure if, like, a few months back, it might even be over a year now, we did get kind of a behind the scenes photo of him. I'm not sure if it was kind of an official one or if it is considered a leak.
I mean,
so I don't know whether I can go into it or not.
It is technically a leak, so let's just say, Anna, you're going to talk about it for 30 seconds, so if anyone wants to ignore this slight leak about who Isildur might be travelling with, fast forward, let's say, 45 seconds now. Anna, go.
Cool. So, we got this set picture of him travelling with a girl. I don't know whether we ever got it confirmed if she's kind of like a human, an elf, whatever, but it's interesting because I wonder if they will travel together alongside Arondir and co, or whether he'll kind of split off, meet her. He could meet her before he ever meets up with Arondir. There's a lot of options for how that goes. However, there's kind of been a lot of talk about whether that could be like a romance, a friendship, someone to just kind of guide him around Middle-earth. So I think I'm quite interested to see how that storyline goes. But that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm done.
I'll just say it's definitely his future wife. And that's all I'll say.
100%.
Yeah. We can talk about that on a future episode once we see that character in official footage, or we expect that, like they did with season 1, they'll do some magazine interviews and they'll probably start revealing who's playing who of the new cast. But what we did see a little bit of, mix of the trailer and the behind the scenes, is Arondir, and we saw Theo. We very conspicuously didn't see Bronwyn, and we had Ismael Cruz Cordova, who plays Arondir, talking about this idea. He says, the darkness did reach in. He's received the biggest blow to his spirit thus far. And we see what maybe worryingly looks like lighting a pyre, and we see Theo in the dark with firelight on his face, with what looks like tears in his eyes. Anna, I guess my question is simple. Do we start the death pool for Bronwyn?
I think we have to start the death pool for Bronwyn. I mean, it's a very interesting choice to not only not include her in the whole trailer, none of the behind the scenes footage, but put in this kind of snippet of Ishmael literally saying that Arondir is being dealt the biggest blow to his spirit. Having him standing over what looks like a funeral pyre, as you said, and then this shot of Theo looking upset, which, listen, is not out of the ordinary. Theo was quite upset in season 1 as well. But they're very interesting shots to put in, and this kind of part of it is just more speculation, theorizing, I guess, so I won't linger too long on it. But I do believe that I heard that Nazanin, who played Bronwyn in season 1, kind of stepped away and kind of distanced herself from acting in around 2022, like just after season 1 came out. So whether she will be in season 2, I'm not sure. I guess it'll be interesting. I think it'll be an interesting turn to see how her death would affect Arondir and Theo, especially their own relationship, because Theo is Bronwyn's child, and he kind of knows Arondir through his mother. So it'll be interesting to see, why they stay together, why they continue traveling together. And if you listen, she may well be alive. They might just be hiding her from us. Maybe they just want us to think this. It could be a complete misdirect.
Yeah, I think I'll say 2 things about that. One, I know what you mean. Like, if Nazanin had, cause we know that for those of you who aren't aware, she's very involved in political activism in her real life. So it's possible she may have chosen to step away from acting to focus on that, which I completely respect. Not everyone wants to stay in one career path their whole time, so I get that. I guess here's what I'll say. If Bronwyn is going to die, I really hope they at least got her back for an episode or 2, because what I really don't want is them to open season 2 and be like, Arondir like hugging Theo and saying, yes, the infection from her wound was clearly still there. It was so swift, but at least she isn't suffering now. And I'm terrified that that's what's going to happen. Like, I just hope if Nazanin did say she wanted to leave, I hope they were just like, please, can you come back and film 1 episode's worth of footage so we can give your character a proper send off. Now, let me also say, shows very rarely show you in their trailer and their behind the scenes footage exactly what's going to happen. They are a big fan, and this isn't Rings of Power specific, this is true in every show and movie, a big fan of misdirects. I'm not saying Bronwyn won't die, but I am just saying it felt a little bit on the nose. So I am going to theorize that she actually is alive for a decent chunk of season 2. Maybe she will still die. I don't know. That's my theory. Like I said, the only thing I hope is that if she has had to leave the show for her own personal reasons, I hope they find a good way to handle that. Because it is, don't get me wrong, it's really difficult for productions to handle that, and I won't be super critical of them if it is clunky, because like some things are out of your control.
Yeah, like my biggest gripe with trailers, especially trailers nowadays, is that they show too much. You know, a lot of trailers show you exactly what's going to happen, you know, every twist and turn that's going to kind of happen in the story. And I think that with trailers like this, teaser trailers especially, there's a certain way you've got to look at them, and you cannot take everything you see at face value. And I mean, we've learned that already, you know, there's shots that we'll talk about in this that I've had like, I've looked at maybe 3-4 different times, and every time I look at them, I have a different idea about what it means, what's going to happen. And I think that's the way you kind of have to approach trailers like this. You know, the first time you watch it, what you assume you're seeing probably isn't what's happening, at least in every scene that you see.
Yep.
And that's what I love about trailers like this. You know, you can theorize on what's going to happen. They're not giving you the whole story. That's why I think this was such a good trailer, especially. You know, there's so much that we don't know, but at the same time, there's so much we've seen. I think it's really good in that respect.
Yeah, so I guess, do you know what? Let's not talk too much about Arondir, Bronwyn, Theo, the Southlands, because we talked about it a lot in our Hopes for Season 2 episode, and we kind of talked about what they might find in Pelagia, whether the Númenorians are going to be there, whether it's going to be empty, all those kind of things. Obviously, we've seen that Isildur is going to link up with Arondir. That's fascinating. But do you know what? As we said when we were recording last night in the first part of this episode, let's try not to just make theories out of thin air at this stage. So let's leave them for now, and let's get on to the area which I know you're going to be very excited to speak about, which is, of course, Númenor, Fair Númenor. So obviously there are so many different characters we can talk about in Númenor. There's everything that we had happen at the end of season 1, but I know, Anna, that for you, there's one character above all else that you want to talk about, and it is, of course, your main man, the ancestor of Eregion, the captain of the Sea Guard himself, and the man who, listeners won't know this, but Anna has a great portrait of Elendil sitting next to her while we record this. So, Anna, Elendil wasn't in the trailer that much, and he was in the behind-the-scenes teaser a little bit more. What did you think about what we saw of Elendil?
Listen, our good friend on Twitter, Sarah, said that we got one shot of Elendil in the trailer, and he looked like he was having the absolute worst day of his life. And I just feel like that's very on character for him. It's very on brand, and it's probably the kind of the main vibe that we're going to get from his character this season is that he's not having a very good time. You know, he's had to leave one of his sons, who he presumes is dead, behind in Númenor. He's kind of assisting his queen, she's led this failed expedition, so he's going to have to deal with that. He's got Eregion, she's kind of, I have this feeling, obviously, it's kind of a shared feeling within the community that she's going to be heavily influenced by Kemen, Pharazôn, the King's Men. So that's that path she's going to go down. It's an interesting shot of him that we have. You know, it looks like he's kind of caught in the middle of this riot. I think you might have a little bit more of an idea of exactly what's going on in that scene, but he does look like he's caught in this kind of riot in the main throne room, and he's reaching towards someone, you know, whoever that may be. It could be Miriel, it could be Eregion. Either way, he's reaching towards someone desperately. You know, he's like he looks like he's kind of screaming, trying to get to someone. And then in the behind the scenes footage, he's standing on this cliff. He's looking over out at the sea, and it's very interesting. I mean, I saw a few people say that it could be kind of this funeral for Isildur. Another thing that I've seen is actually that it's something to do with Miriel, because we see her in the behind the scenes footage, I believe, this shot of her in this kind of white dress. Some people thought it might have been a wedding dress. To me, it looked a little bit more sacrificial. So listen, I'm not going to go into theories about what I think is going to happen there, but he's clearly desperately trying to reach someone, and whether it is Miriel or Eregion, I have a feeling it's going to be one of those two. He's gonna lose some people this season, and it's going to be very heartbreaking for him, but it was good to see him, the little part of him that we got, and it was nice to see him in a different outfit as well, which we haven't yet.
Yes, no, looking a little bit not scruffier, but a little bit more dressed down in that scene on the cliffs, wearing a simple tunic. I know someone from Numenation noticed that on the collar of his shirt there are little stars embroidered into it. And so Elendil, the one who loves the stars, it's great to see them continuing with those kind of really cool costume details. On the throne room scene, maybe I'll talk about Miriel after. As Anna said, I obviously was involved in sharing a few leaks about Númenor last year. And to be fair, I kept away from any real big plot points. I just shared a few costume details, a few scene descriptions, more of a bigger revelation about Eregion than, to be honest, anyone else. But with Elendil, I think I'm going to obviously avoid talking about any plot points that I could accidentally spoil. So I'll try and talk about it in a more general sense. I think you're spot on with the whatever's happening in the throne room. It looks like there's an absolute riot going on. Absolute kind of the crowd is searching. People are grabbing each other. I mean, I know it's only half a second, but you can see how it's almost, as I joked when I was putting my notes together, it's Elendil's first time in a mosh pit, and he just looks like a dad who's ended up in a mosh pit, and he really doesn't want to be there, and he doesn't quite know why he's there, and so he looks in a great amount of distress, and he's reaching for someone. And then we get the scene on the cliffs in the behind-the-scenes trailer. Now, there's some really interesting things you can see in that behind-the-scenes footage. You can see that Eregion is there. You can see that Will Keen's character is there, and Will Keen is one of the new cast members. And I don't think this is much of a spoiler or leak, but I've heard that he's going to be playing an ally to Pharazôn, which I think you can tell anyway from the behind the scenes. He's standing next to Pharazôn in one shot we get from the throne room. He's dressed in a very similar way. He's holding a very large book, and so I wonder whether he might have maybe he's got a position in the court, whether it's kind of, in the Game of Thrones parlance, whether he's going to be like a master of laws, something to do with the kind of bureaucracy of Númenor, as obviously we know Pharazôn is the Chancellor at this point in the show's timeline. So we know they're there. We know that Elendil's there. We know that Miriel's there, because if you look at the wide shot, you can actually zoom in and see that she's there. Like you say, kind of very... Now, I think that's a different dress to the one she's wearing in the throne room, to be clear. On the cliffs, it looks like she's wearing quite a simple white dress, but maybe that's just she's taken off some of the finery. I like your idea of it being a funeral for Isildur. I've heard other people say, is it going to be some kind of religious ceremony? Obviously, we know from Tolkien's writings, the Númenorians did have a few religious ceremonies, but really in the worship of Eru Ilúvatar, and they would ascend the Meneltarma, which is the big mountain at the kind of center of Númenor that we saw in a few scenes. But it might also have something to do with the way the show has placed the reverence of the sea at the heart of Elendil's character and a lot of Númenorian culture. This idea of the sea is always right. So I wonder whether there is a quasi-religious element. I love the idea of it being a funeral for Isildur. So I don't actually have a lot of ideas on that scene, but I think it's safe to say Elendil is going to be going through a lot. Like you say, he thinks one of his sons has died. It appears he's somewhat estranged from Anarion, his other son, as we kind of heard about in season 1. He didn't even really want to talk about Anarion when Isildur brought him up. Eregion, we know, is getting closer with Kemen, who is Pharazôn's son. We know she's part of the Builders Guild now, and we can see that her costume has started to change. It's moved into a different color set, these kind of emerald green colors. And so I think, if season 1 laid the grounds, we talked about this in episode 3 of season 1, we talked about this episode, the idea of Elendil's family almost being a family scale representation of the societal divide in Númenor. I think we're just going to see that almost grow this season. So I think Elendil is in for a bad time.
Yeah, I think you're very right about the family dynamic just representing the general kind of political landscape of Númenor. And I think that Elendil, he's in a similar park to Gil-galad for me for this season, where I wanted to see him very much so in the trailer, but I understand why his role was scaled back, because Elendil will have his time. We know that Númenor is going to have its kind of main season. Clearly it has to, Elendil especially. But as of right now, this probably isn't his moment. And of course he's still going to be there, but I think that his performance this season will be quite subtle to kind of stand back and let a lot of the other plot lines play out. Maybe Númenor, this is kind of the build up for Númenor, not the culmination of it. Whereas for Eregion, this is kind of its season to rise and fall, And I think that will. It's probably why we didn't get as much as we maybe wanted of Númenor. Yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about Elendil for this. We didn't get too much of him at all.
Like I said, I've had some leaks given to me, which I now believe to be 100% correct, because all the ones about the costumes, people may have seen me, I was a little bit smug in the way I was doing it, kind of quote tweeting my old leaks from last year saying, look, Eärend's got a new dress. Weird how it matches the description I had. Oh, Pharazôn's wearing red robes. I wonder who said that. Oh, Miriel's wearing a white dress. How interesting. What I'll say is, obviously, I am aware of some of the plot lines, so I'll avoid talking about those plot lines, but all I'll say is, I think if the impression you got from the trailer that Elendil was going through a tough time, then I would say you are probably on the right track. And just to pick up on something you said, I think you're right to say that, if you think about last season, the bits of Númenor we saw were almost as they related to other plots, so as they related to Galadriel, as they were related to Halbrand. Yes, if in many ways Isildur's plotline in season 1 was the only one where we kind of saw Númenor in isolation, and maybe a little bit with Eärend and Kemen, and the scene with Kemen and Pharazôn, which is one of my favourite little scenes from season 1. But I think this is a transition season, and that doesn't mean big things aren't going to happen, but it's going to take a slight backseat in the sense that the main part of next season, I assume, and I think should be devoted to Sauron, Eregion, the elves, Mordor, because that is the big plot point they need to get through. But interesting things are going to happen. For those of you who've read the books, obviously, we know where Pharazôn's going with his story, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I do just want to address, and then I can ask you if you've got any more thoughts on Miriel, the white dress that she walks into the throne room with in the behind the scenes. People, like you said, thought it was a wedding dress. I'll say a couple of things on that. One, there is no reason we should assume that in Númenor they get married dressed in white. Two, the one area of Númenor's visual language we have seen white be a prominent colour is actually in her father, the king's outfits. We saw that especially in episode 8 in his scene with Eärend wearing all white. And it's actually, if you look at the almost kind of top of the outfit around the shoulders and the jewelry, it is very similar to what Miriel is wearing. So I'm not making a prediction that this is going to be like her coronation or anything. But I think given that we know that she's going to be walking into a Númenor where her father has just died, she is naturally going to try and step into her father's shoes. And some of that is going to be about wearing the raiment of the kingship or the queenship in her case. So I think that's what that's about more than anything. And that's all I'll say on that for now. But obviously we also saw, like you said, in the behind the scenes, we saw a shot of Miriel in the water. We saw a shot of a bit of the big sea worm monster in the trailer. We might think that's a vision. Do you have any more thoughts on Miriel that we saw from the trailer, the teaser, that you wanted to get out?
I mean, my only thing is we spoke, I think it might have been on the space, about it. It comes down to this idea of, is what we're seeing in the trailer really what's happening? Are we seeing kind of dream sequences? Are these visions? Are they not? Because obviously that shot of Miriel with the worm who's back and he's got some tentacles now, as you said, looks absolutely incredible. I said the spiders don't scare me. Sea monsters, on the other hand, I am absolutely terrified of. So they're the scenes that I'll kind of have to look away from a little bit. But when I first saw that shot, naturally my mind was like, okay, that has to be a vision, almost definitely. But then, we got that behind the scenes footage. And as you said, if you zoom out, you can kind of see Miriel in this very plain white robe next to the cliffs. And it is interesting that you have that and also these shots of her kind of in the water in this white dress. And it's like, it very much still could be a vision, but is it a possibility that this is something that happens to her? Is there something going on at the cliffs where Miriel ends up in the ocean?
I would almost suggest, and here's and this isn't based on leaks, by the way. I know nothing about this, so I'm completely clueless on what they're doing this. I do think it's a vision, but I do wonder if it's connected, and that for whatever reason, that whether both Miriel and Elendil are going in the water or just one of them, like you said, we could be completely wrong about this. And like you say, it is Isildur's funeral or it is a religious ceremony, but say Miriel does go in the water in that scene. what if when she's underwater, that's when, without even a plan to it, she has a vision of the worm, and it's just another way of showing her foreboding sense of Numenor's destruction and downfall. And so I think that's where they might be going with it. The other thing I would say about Miriel is a lot of people have been saying, like, is she going to be blind now for the rest of the series? I don't know. Some people have said, in real life, there are cases of flash blindness where your eyesight slowly recovers. Obviously, it's fantasy. We don't know exactly what they're going to do with that. But people have said, oh, she's walking down the steps in that behind-the-scenes trailer, so she can't be blind. Here's what I think. What was the last thing we saw Miriel do in season 1, episode 8? She's in the ship and she's counting her steps so she can memorize how to walk the deck of the ship. I think this is going to be about her trying to demonstrate her strength to the people of Númenor, saying, I may have been blinded and some of you are going to see this as a weakness, but I will show that I can still be the ruler you need. And so I think that's going to be it. And I think it's also very telling that you can see in that shot, you see a certain man's hairstyle, which keen Elendil fans will recognize as the back of his head. So he's waiting for her at the bottom of the steps to guide her the rest of the way to the throne. So
I mean, yeah, it feels like something they almost could have rehearsed because, as we mentioned before, they're returning from this failed expedition to Middle-earth, and she very much has to prove that she's still someone who can rule them because, for a lot of the citizens of Númenor, more specifically the King's Men, what they will see is someone who chose an elf over the people of Númenor. And because she brought Galadriel back and chose to listen to her and go to Middle-earth in the first place, so she's really going to have to kind of fight back against that and prove that she's still the leader, which I think kind of brings us nicely onto Pharazôn, because we know that he'll be working in the background to kind of try and find a way to usurp, and I think this is probably the perfect time for him when you have these kind of rising tensions between the King's Men and the faithful, and you obviously have your queen who's just kind of in their eyes sacrificed a lot of Númenorians on the whims of an elf
and achieved nothing. Achieved nothing
and
for them.
Achieved absolutely nothing. All they've done is they've just lost, basically. And listen, my first thought about Pharazôn was I didn't think that I was going to come out of the trailer and think that he was the person who looked the coolest. However, I've got to say, he looks absolutely great in red. And that shot of him with the eagle, the eagle of Manwë, just that is the one shot that really stuck with me in the trailer. And listen, I have absolutely no idea how that's going to go down. A lot of people seem to think that he's riding the eagle into the shot. Don't believe that, because listen, if we know one thing about Pharazôn's character is that he does not respect the Valar. That is his downfall. That is the downfall of Númenor. So I think, if anything, he will probably attack the eagle, and that will be his first kind of sign of disrespect towards the Valar. So I'm quite intrigued to see how that scene goes, because listen, the eagle's behind him. He's got a sword. There's lots of people watching him. I think that will be a very tense scene, and I think that could be kind of a turning point for the fate of Númenor.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I just want to say he's not riding the eagle, and that's not a spoiler or a leak I'm giving you. He's just not riding the eagle. If you watch the trailer in high enough definition on a big screen, there's nothing on the eagle's back when it's flying in, and Pharazôn is facing away from the... I get it. It's edited in a way to make it look like Pharazôn's arriving, and he's going to leap off the eagle and draw his sword. And it's just like, yes, okay, think about that for a second and think about whether the show is going to do that. For all the reasons Anna said. Obviously not.
Oh.
Who knows? Is he going to attack the eagle? Is he going to have a standoff with the eagle? Is the eagle there to deliver a message? Obviously, we know in the books the eagles can talk. Very hard to do in live action, because as soon as you have an animal that has like a mouth that doesn't look like it should be able to form words, as in a beak, it looks very silly when it talks, so unless you're going to do telepathic communication. So I don't think... I'd listen, if they could do it well, would love to see it, but I don't think the eagle's going to talk. But I think, like you said, it's about the symbolism. It's about an eagle of Manwë, a representative of the Valar coming. Now, is he coming there to... We don't know when in the season this is arriving, so has Pharazôn already attempted to usurp the throne, or has he been successful already? Or is this going to come at a moment of tension where the Valar are sending a message to not listen to Pharazôn? And Pharazôn basically says, here's what I think of your message. I'm going to draw a sword on you and dare you to defy me because I am the king of all men.
I think it's very interesting because, we had a few references to the Valar last season, kind of more specifically within the White Leaf scenes.
Mm,
And Midia was very kind of explicit about the fact that they were to do with the Valar. It will be quite interesting, especially if it goes down the route that you said, that an Eagle of Manwë comes on behalf of the Valar, because you also have potentially Annatar arriving as an emissary of the Valar. So that could be kind of a nice parallel to kind of tie those two plots together, how these different people react to that sort of kind of divine message coming to them.
mm,
It's really interesting. And listen, I think that a talking animal can be done well. You have to give them the right voice. Case in point, Aslan from Narnia.
oh, for
Liam
God's sake.
Neeson doing the voice of Aslan. Perfect. If they do something like that with the Eagles, great. If it's more along the lines of kind of the live action Lion King, however, bin it. We don't want it.
Yeah. I'm going to move on swiftly from Aslan, otherwise I'm going to start annoying Anna with some comments. For those of you who know, you know. But anyway, anyway, on that, one thing I did want to say, we have actually, obviously we had an Aule name drop with dwarves in season 1, but people forget we got a Manwë name drop. And it was in the scene with Elrond talking about the fable, the apocryphal tale of Mithril, the roots of the Hithyglir, and he says the warrior has a heart, I think he says a heart as pure as Manwë. So I love that they're going to, I hope they do continue to reference the Valar, because obviously for the general audience it doesn't mean much, but for the book audience it's just a fun little thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, Pharazôn's outfit, clearly that is a symbol. He's moving away from the blue and gold of Númenor into a dominant, aggressive red. Even his chest piece, which last season was used to symbolize the different guilds, they're still on there, but this time it almost looks more like a kind of Byzantine chest piece of armor. It's really cool. And I think one of the things I heard about his costume, and I'm sure people won't mind this leak, is because we see it in the trailer, is that his sword is displayed much more prominently in his outfit this season. Like, yes, he had it in the first season, and we even saw it when Galadriel escapes from jail. We saw him draw it, but this is a very different Pharazôn, and this is a Pharazôn who is visually making his position clear. But let's talk about the people around these men. Obviously our main three are Elendil, Miriel, and Pharazôn, but around them we've obviously got Eärien, daughter of Elendil. We've got Kemen, son of Pharazôn, and not seen in the trailer, but someone who was a fairly important supporting character within the kind of wider Elendil family was Valandil, Isildur's friend. So maybe let's start with Eärien, because she, or I should say her actress, Emma Horvath, got a bit of speaking time in the trailer, and we saw her in the shot of them on the cliffs. So obviously, we both feel that Eärion's going to go down a darker path. She might side with the Kingsmen. She might side with Pharazôn. How quickly do you think, just your thoughts in general, but do you think we're going to see that, pretty quickly this season once she learns about Isildur's death?
I think we will, and I think they set it up quite well, at least towards the end of last season. That the last kind of interaction between Isildur and Eärien, and I do think we touched on at the time that it wasn't maybe kind of shown to us in the best way that it could have been, but we have this shot of her watching him leave watching him leave Númenor for Middle Earth. And obviously he goes with Elendil, and Elendil comes back without Isildur. So I wonder whether that can kind of further divide her and her father and push her more towards Kemen and Pharazôn. If, it's not Elendil's fault, but we all know that Elendil will be blaming himself for letting Isildur come along with him. And you have to wonder if Eärien, in her grief, will harbour those same feelings towards Elendil. It'll kind of divide her. A lot of Elendil's time, I do believe, will be spent with Miriel anyway. So it's going to create that kind of divide between herself and her father, and it makes sense for her to find that comfort kind of elsewhere. And listen, we know from season 1 that Kemen is very desperate almost to impress his father, and if his father kind of senses that Eärien is this person who could be manipulated, I feel like he's going to kind of even maybe whisper in Kemen's ear things to say to Eärien, things to have her do. And I think that that's the route that they're going to go down. And I do think that it'll happen quite quickly in season 2, maybe a little bit more in the background, but I think it'll be interesting to see how that kind of chasm opens up between her and Elendil.
I think the important thing to remember as well is, what was the last thing we saw Eärien do in season 1? She found the Palantir.
Yeah.
And what is that going to have done to her mind? What has she seen the downfall of Númenor? Has she seen something else? We know that's what Miriel saw, but there's no guarantee she saw the same thing. And so I think I completely agree with you. It's going to be very interesting to see if her animosity about Isildur's death is directed at Elendil. But I'm also thinking, to what extent is her anger directed at Miriel as well? And because almost I'm thinking of it in that political context of the divide between the Kingsmen and the faithful, and Pharazôn's usurpation of the throne. It's particularly important, I think, that Eärien doesn't just blame her father. And we don't even know whether she will blame her father. I think she's going to blame Miriel. It was Miriel's decision to go to Middle-earth. It was Miriel who's been using the Palantir, which she is now the only one, apart from Galadriel, who obviously isn't there, who now knows about this. So, A, what is she going to do with the information about the Palantir? B, what is she going to do with the information she saw in the Palantir? And C, it's just so hard for me. Maybe we'll be wrong, but it's so hard for me not to imagine, and this isn't based on leaked information, but it's so hard for me to imagine that she isn't going to end up being drawn towards Pharazôn's side, especially because she's part of one of the guilds as well, and he's in charge of the guilds. But here's where I think it gets interesting. Who knows when in season 2 we're going to see Pharazôn make a move to the throne? It could be quite quickly. People might think that this could happen like last episode of season 2. I think it could happen really soon. Miriel returns. She's lost all these men. Things about Pharazôn has obviously been plotting this whole time. We saw a bit of that in season 1. He might not waste any time. And so if that happens, I think what's really interesting is we don't know when that's going to happen. And when it happens, we don't know where Miriel is going to be. Is she going to be locked in the tower like her father was? Is she going to be put in prison? Who knows? And when that happens, what is Elendil going to do? And based on what Elendil does, what is Eärien going to do? And so it's this beautiful, I think the thing they can really play with there is this almost like domino effect. So the first domino falls with the king dying. The second domino, or actually the first domino, is technically the king accidentally showing Eärien the Palantir. Then the king dies. Then Miriel returns. And so, without even referring to anything I might or might not know, think about it in terms of that domino effect. Things could speed up quite quickly.
I mean, I feel like we have to kind of assume, at least from what we saw in season 1, like you said, the two people who we know saw into the Palantir were Miriel and Galadriel, and they both envisioned the Akallabeth, so they both saw the downfall of Númenor and the wave. So you want to kind of assume that that's probably what Eärien saw as well. And listen, she's like a young girl whose basically entire family has just gone off to war. Her other brother's nowhere to be seen. And she's just kind of seeing basically the downfall of her entire civilization. It's got to be like something that weighs on you quite a lot. So I think that there will be this focus on her struggle of, does she tell someone? Will Kemen act as this kind of confidant? Not even in kind of this political way, even more as just a shoulder to cry on, a close friend, maybe something even less platonic. But will Kemen act as this confidant to kind of get that information out of her? Will she kind of offer it willingly to him? Will it be accidental? Something like that. And then I think at the same time, it's quite interesting because, it's how will Pharazôn go about usurping the throne? Will he... There's the kind of a foundation to this political divide in Númenor, and it is the kind of fear of how Númenor will end up. And if Pharazôn plays upon those fears of the destruction of Númenor and the downfall of Númenor, if things don't change soon, and Eärien has this vision of that exact thing happening, she doesn't know what is going to lead to that. So if Pharazôn kind of plays into her fears of the destruction of Númenor, it would make sense for her to kind of give that information up to him. And, whether that information becomes public and the whole of Númenor find out that Miriel had that information the whole time, that it feels like that could almost be maybe the climax of this season. That information becomes public knowledge. We've had this kind of tension between Miriel and Pharazôn, depending on when he kind of attempts this to kind of take the throne. It's interesting, and I think it's, as you said, it could play out at any pace. I don't really know when it's going to happen.
It's very interesting, and I think the last thing I'll perhaps say on this is, let's not forget that, and this is how he's going to bring Valandil into this discussion. let's not forget the fact that Elendil is still a captain in the Sea Guard. We've seen that Valandil, not technically a member of the Sea Guard, but with this expeditionary force now holds a position of somewhat authority, or maybe he doesn't. We'll have to see what happens in terms of the military structure of Númenor. I think that's another thing to consider in terms of how Pharazôn might try and consolidate his power base. But there's a good chance that Elendil is going to be so occupied with supporting Miriel that he neglects his daughter, and that is only going to further add to her looking to Kemen and to Pharazôn. So I think there's so many interesting things they could do there. Now, obviously, something we talked about in the hopes for season 2 is Anarion going to show up? We still haven't seen anything of him, so for now I'm going to assume he's either not there or he isn't going to be there till towards the end of the season. But at the same time, we have to remember we have probably seen a grand total of 20 seconds of Númenor footage, so let's not jump to any conclusions yet. Like I said, Will Keen's character as an ally to Pharazôn is going to be very interesting. I strongly suspect that obviously we had something like 19, 20 new cast members announced. I doubt Will Keen will be the only new one in Númenor, so we could expect to see some other players, whether they're on the Faithful or the Kingsman side. Yeah, the trailer was very sparing with Númenor, and I don't think Númenor will be the primary plotline, but don't underestimate how much we could be seeing in season 2 all the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is easy to kind of take the first trailer and be like, right, this is it. This is what we're getting. If they've not put anyone in here, that means they're not going to be here for the whole season. But I think you're right. I think it's best just to kind of let it play out. And I think the last thing I have to say on that, it relates back to what you were saying before, about the characters dealing with this very Númenorian ideal of the sea is always right. And, Elendil is a very big believer in that. And listen, you can tell that because his wife literally drowned and he still believes that the sea is always right. And I think that would be quite interesting to see how that plays between him and Eregion, because Eorion's potentially going to get this vision of Númenor being swallowed up by the ocean. So she's going to have to deal with the fact that, okay, maybe the sea isn't always right. And that those kind of ideals playing off each other, I think, will be really interesting. And then I think just in terms of Valandil, we were kind of theorizing what role he'd play in season 2. And I think potentially if we don't end up getting an Anarion, it would be interesting to see Valandil kind of step up as almost a surrogate son to Elendil.
Yeah.
Even unintentionally, just as kind of a coping mechanism for both of them, because Valandil's lost his two best friends, and Elendil's lost a son. He doesn't have his other son to kind of lean on for support. So whether Valandil steps up within the ranks of the Sea Guard and they become close, it could just be something like that.
And I think there is 2 points connected to that. One, when Pharazôn takes power, we expect that Miriel is going to be sidelined in whatever way, and Elendil, because of his closeness to her, is probably also going to be sidelined. Now, if Valandil is still, he hasn't attracted the ire of Pharazôn, maybe he's an ally for Elendil and Miriel. Obviously, we got the scene where Valandil was the one leading the Queen's horse when she was blinded, so they have a little bit of a connection. So I wonder if those 2 main players are sidelined, Valandil might be their way to connect with other faithful people under Pharazôn's rule. That would be really interesting. And the only other thing kind of going into that idea of Valandil kind of accidentally becoming a surrogate son to Elendil is he in some ways the angel on the shoulder of Eregion as well, because he's going to be grieving Isildur just like she is. Obviously, in a slightly different way. It's a friend, not a family member, but they were very close. And so I wonder if he's the one, if Elendil is occupied with Miriel, I wonder if Valandil might be the one to kind of try and connect with Eregion on that. I mean, also, it should be said, Valandil is a very minor supporting character. It's possible he does very little. But they've got an established character, so they can do what they want with him.
He might not be there at all, but I think that's a really good point you make. And it relates back to something that we said, I believe, in the season 2 hopes. And I'm so sorry, because I am going to mention Eregion and Celebrimbor again. But it's this idea of someone's kind of descent towards this darker side being a lot more impactful if they do have someone kind of trying to pull them out of it. And, you said that maybe you have Annatar who's kind of pulling Celebrimbor down this dark path, whereas you could have a character like Narvi, the angel on his shoulder, kind of trying to kind of redirect him towards the light. If they had sort of that same situation for Eregion, where she is falling kind of towards Kemen and Pharazôn, would it not be more impactful if you have this person kind of trying desperately to prevent that from happening to her? And listen, it might be Valandil, it might not be. It could be Elendil, but I think that does make it all the more kind of heartbreaking when she ends up building the Temple of Morgoth.
Yeah.
Not unconfirmed, but a very, very
We won't
heavily
find that
built
out for a season or two, so neither of us are leaking anything here. It's just our prediction. I think that pretty much covers everything with Númenor, but I think it can be best summarized as when Miriel in season 1, when she was giving her speech, she was talking about every one of us must decide who we will be, and kind of what Númenor should be. And I think in a way, while obviously that was about the expedition to Middle-earth and Númenor saving the men of Middle-earth, I think the next season it could be summarized as Miriel's speech about every single person in Númenor is going to have to choose who they will be and what Númenor is to them. So will be very interesting to see. Right, this episode, Anna and I have been talking about how long this episode is going to be, so we'll try and crack through the dwarves and Rhûn in the last 20 minutes or however long it takes us. No promises. If you're listening to this, God knows, we're probably at the 3-hour mark already, but bear with us. Oh
God, yeah. In my mind, it's just this 2 hours that we've been talking. I forget that we recorded a whole hour last night as well.
Yeah. Right. We will forge on. So over to Khazad-dum and the dwarves, and I've kind of separated this into two separate plot lines, which I think of, and one is Prince Durin and Disa, and we obviously got in the behind the scenes, we got Owain Arthur, who plays Prince Durin, talking about this idea of he says his relationship with his father has gone and his pride has taken a massive hit. And we also see him in the trailer obviously talking about an evil, ancient and powerful has awoken. We don't know if he's talking about Sauron the Balrog. We're not sure what he's referring to there. We have Disa in the behind the scenes doing lots of stuff. She's doing some of that, I can't remember what they called it in season 1, but that process of singing to the rocks to find out where the all was to mine, where not to mine. We see her looking into what looks worryingly like a Palantir. Not sure how there's a Palantir in Khazad-dum, very worrying. And we get a strange scene of her and Durin. Almost, they look like they're in a market, but then there's an explosion of some coloured powder, so I don't know what's going on there. Anna, we'll come to the king in a second, but let's talk about Prince Durin and Disa. What is going to be going on with those two this season?
Listen, I'm going to say that we got more from the dwarves in the trailer than I expected. I know we didn't get a lot by any means, but I did say that one of my fears was that they'd be kind of a little bit more sidelined this season. So I'm happy with the amount that we've got from them. I'm happy with what I feel like the direction is that they're going with their story. And for Prince Durin, at least, we left him at the end of season 1. He's kind of fallen out with his father because of his friendship with Elrond. He kind of betrayed him in that way. And we leave him and Disa off in this. They've got this kind of dynamic where Princess Disa, she's not just Durin's wife, she is the one to say to him at the end of season 1, one day this place will be ours and kind of you will rule. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic, and I feel like they're going to kind of carry that on into season 2. I mean, we spoke about this earlier when we were talking about Elrond, but there does seem to be this moment where Durin is kind of giving this rallying speech. So I do believe that his plotline in season 2 will be The Lord of the Rings on Prime just tweeted. Sorry, I just got a notification for it on my screen.
What did they tweet?
I think it might just be the same trailer as... Oh, they've just reposted an article.
Shut up, Rings of Power on Prime. Honestly, both Anna and I just got notifications on our phone. The Lord of the Ring on Prime has tweeted, and all they've done is reposted the IGN article. Don't do that. We're 3 hours into recording a podcast about your show, and you're interrupting to retweet a bloody article, which isn't going to tell us anything new. Anyway, rant over. I'm sorry about that. You were saying about Disa and the dwarves.
I was. So I do believe that Durin's kind of arc, at least in season 2, is kind of dealing with his newly tense, well, I say newly tense, it was always quite tense, this very tense relationship with his father and how he can kind of get his own power within Khazad-dum. And I think he will do it quite subtly, quite sneakily, and I think that they will kind of do it. And I don't know if they'll have any involvement in the rings. We have this very quick shot between him and Celebrimbor, whether he kind of goes out of his way to get the power that way and kind of forge that relationship again between the elves and the dwarves, but I do feel like it's going to end with him stepping back up and leading at least a few of the dwarves of Khazad-dum to aid the elves in Eregion, and I do believe it will be with the ire of his father. I don't believe he'll get his father's support for that.
No, I think I think you touched on some really interesting thing there. One, Disa is not, as you said, she is not in any way, as Tolkien often sadly wrote them, oh, and so had a wife. I didn't even bother coming up with a name for her. Never mind, moving on. She is a fully fledged character, and she has her own motives, her own desires, her own ambitions, and clearly they are a team. That couple, they work together, and Disa is almost the driving force. She's the engine of that relationship in terms of their ambition. And I think, as you said, we're going to continue to see that. I'll maybe talk about the Palantir thing in a second, but I want to go straight to where you were talking about with Durin. In terms of the dialogue we got in that trailer, we got him giving a speech about an evil rising, and at the end of the behind-the-scenes one, we saw him say, will you fight? Now, for those of you who haven't read Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, at the end of the Battle of the Sack of Eregion, obviously everything seems lost, and Elrond is pretty much in a dire strait. Once Eregion is sacked, Sauron turns his ire upon Elrond and his remaining soldiers and the survivors of Eregion, of which there are not many, and it looks like all is lost. And then dwarves come forth from Khazad-dum, and they basically just draw Sauron's attention. They can't defeat him. In the end, they too are driven back to Khazad-dum, and actually, in the books, that's the point at which the doors of Khazad-dum are pretty much sealed, because at this point they're driven back by Sauron. But what it does is it gives Elrond the time to lead the survivors away, and it's from there that he goes, finds the hidden veil, and then founds Rivendell, which I think will be not this season, but next season. But so exciting. But I think what's so clever is that, I think, like you say, they're going to do that. It's going to be Prince Doran who leads the army, not the king. And what I love so much, and this is why the show is so good, and when people say they don't like it, I'm just like, how do you not love stuff like this? That line in the books has everything to do with the political alliance between the dwarves and the elves, because Celebrimbor has made fast friends with the dwarves because they've traded because of his relationship with Na'vi. And I'm sure they'll do some of that in season 2. Like you say, we see Durin going to Eregion at one point. But why the show is going to make this so much more emotionally impactful is because when the dwarves come to rescue Elrond, it is his friend who, he had this heartbreaking reunion and then having to leave again in season 1. They had their Namarie moment. And in his time of need, when all hope seems lost, I can almost picture it that we're going to see Elrond with his forces. We're going to see Sauron take his army from Eregion bearing down. And just as everything seems lost, we're going to hear in the distance the sound of boots, and then, like when Durin entered the room for their stone-breaking contest, we're going to hear him say Khazad, and then the dwarves are going to shout Doom. And a lot like in the kind of Battle of the Pelennor Fields, hope lives and hope arises.
That is just the most kind of Tolkien idea at its core, is just his idea of eucatastrophe. When all hope is lost, someone, and it's going to be a friend, is going to show up and help you.
Yeah.
And like you said, the relationship that they forged in season 1 was one of the strongest aspects in season 1, and it would be remiss of them not to use that in season 2. Like, the emotional weight that would carry after, the Siege of Eregion is going to be a hard watch. That's 2 episodes of just bloodshed. We're going to have this, this fall of Celebrimbor. It's going to be horrible. So for those kind of heartfelt moments amidst that, it's going to be amazing.
And you need that in Tolkien. Like you said, you need the light. It is not a grimdark fantasy world. It is not it is brutal, but it is not kind of without
it's not merciless.
Exactly. And there is divine intervention, and there is hope, and there is eucatastrophe. I think moving from, because I think we've nailed that. We're so right about that. We don't even need to discuss that more. We're so good at this. We said we weren't going to do theories, but we've definitely just nailed that theory. Yeah, but Disa, on
Is
the
where
other
we're wrong 4 months down the line.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm going to do is, if we're wrong about this, when we record our episode 8 review, I'm going to come back, I'm going to find this clip, and I'm going to edit it back in, and we're going to have to listen to it and sound like complete idiots. But with Disa, the big thing in this trailer is we see her in the behind the scenes holding what looks like a Palantir. And I'm not even going to try and speculate how there's a Palantir there, because the show's taken a slightly strange approach by saying 7 there once were, but now the rest are lost. But actually the Palantir are meant to be after the fall of Númenor. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that right now. But here's my theory. I think she, much like Miriel sees the downfall of Númenor, I think Disa is going to see the downfall of Khazad-dum. And when we see that shot in the trailer of a rock falling onto the bridge, I'm not 100% sure, because that does look like it's filmed in a way as if to be real. But I'm just holding some caution for myself that what we might actually be seeing there is a vision of the fall of Khazad-dum when the Balrog properly awakes and, ruins their day.
Listen, I think, me and you are both on the same page about the fact that the Balrog should not have been included last season. It was very unnecessary, and it just felt like a callback to the Fellowship of the Ring movie. That's all it felt like to me. It would make more sense, like you said, regardless of how Disa ends up with a Palantir. If she looks into it and sees the fall of Khazad-dum, that is when it would make sense to bring in the Balrog, because we know that that's going to happen. That is going to happen down the line. I don't like the idea that it's just sat down there waiting, and they've dropped a little leaf on it. It's woken up, because they've given us this scene of it waking up.
Yeah.
So what is it just gonna go back to sleep for a few hundred years?
Like I said in our last episode, it's going to do what I do. It's going to hit the snooze button on its alarm and go, oh, that was just a leaf, actually. I kind of, it's like when you wake up because you've had a bad dream and you scream, and then you realize you're fine and you're like, oh, thank God, I'll go back to sleep. That's what the Balrog's done. He's overreacted to what's happened, and now he's like, oh, okay, do you know what? Actually, time to go back to sleep.
Yeah, and in a few thousand years, when it's a rock that falls on him instead, that's when he's going to wake up. That's going to be the wake-up call. But yeah, I think if they were gonna use this season to have Disa envision the fall of Khazad-dum, they could have waited to introduce the Balrog then, because it would have made a lot more sense, and I think it would have been quite cool to see it in that moment, because we know what happens to Khazad-dum, and having a character at that point in time envision what's going to happen as well. Incredible. And I think that would lend a lot to Disa's character as well, because we already know that she's this driven, powerful kind of princess, but to have that knowledge alongside that would only kind of motivate her more. And listen, however they go about that, I'm actually a believer that the rock falling onto the bridge does actually happen. And I only think that because we kind of have that clip of her, when Bear McCreary is talking about the soundtrack for season 2, we know that Sophia is going to sing again, this plea to the rocks. And I think she says something like it's going to be bigger than last season. Mm. So that just, to me, kind of means that there's going to be a little bit more destruction in Khazad-dum. There's more need for this kind of whatever she's doing. But listen, Bear McCreary and Sophia Nombete are the absolute best combination in the world. Like, A Plea to the Rocks was one of the most beautiful tracks from season 1. I don't know how they can kind of improve on that, but if they do, just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I can't wait to see what they're going to do with that. And also, I agree with you that might not be a dream vision sequence. I'm putting that out there because I think it's always good to hedge on the side of there are more visions than we think in any trailer. But another evidence in support of your argument that it is real is that, and this will lead us into talking about King Durin, who we really need to talk about. There is a shot of him looking up through a hole in the the rock, and light is streaming through. So while he may have rejected Prince Durin's plan to mine the mithril, I think because of something else we see in the trailer, I think he is going to get greedier with his mining and his excavation and his expansion, and that indeed might cause the kind of cave-in that we see on the bridge. And so I guess that leads me into the point of, confirmed in this trailer, we got 3 rings for the elves last season. This season, very clear we are going to see the 7 rings for the dwarves, but also we're going to see at least one of them distributed, because in the trailer we see King Durin with his ring. I mean, that's pretty exciting.
It was pretty exciting, and listen, I'm so sorry to be negative again. I'm
Oh,
very torn. I'm very torn on the design of the rings. I kind of toyed a bit with it in season one. I really like Nenya, and it's kind of whether purposeful, it probably is. It's kind of parallels to the Fountain of Galadriel.
yeah.
Absolutely love that design. It's the colourful rings I'm not too sold on. And listen, I know that I said before that fantasy is very whimsical and it should be allowed to be whimsical.
Yeah.
But I very much did like
But
the
I would
kind
like
of
my jewelry to be a little bit more like All Saints, I'd like it to be a little more just kind of plain silver,
no. But listen, and here's what I'm gonna say: the kind of listen. Actually, the kind of shocking blue of the ring really kind of like grabbed me. And I
Mm,
think that is one of the things, the rings are beautiful and they're very powerful, and I feel like you can see that through it. And it's a very interesting shot because he's in Khazad-dum, so he's in this quite dark environment, and the ring is just this kind of like bright light. It takes up all the attention of the shot. And I
mm.
think that was very well done. And I'm just very excited and kind of interested to see at what point during the season he'll receive the ring, because we have Prince Durin talking to Celebrimbor. We assume he goes to Eregion. So does he go to get the ring for his father? Does he go after his father receives a ring? It's the kind of series of how the events are going to unfold is quite interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think this is where we inevitably return to the idea. Actually, no, I want to address your ring point for a second, because I don't 100% disagree with you, but I also don't care. I don't have strong feeling as much as I like wearing jewelry and I have rings on at the moment, and I you know I don't really care what they look like to a certain extent. And one thing I will say, actually, I kind of agreed with you that with the three elven rings, the design I liked most was Nenya. But I think Vilya and Narya, while they didn't look great sitting on the table, when we got that shot of them on
Yeah.
the elven hands, I actually thought they looked pretty good there. And it's one of those things where, and this will connect to King Durin's ring, because in one of the behind the scenes shots, we see him holding an axe, and as he turns the axe, the light glints off his hand, and you can see he's wearing the ring. And I want to talk about that shot more in a second, but I'll stay on topic. I do actually think with a lot of these rings, there is a weird thing when they're and I guess do you know what I think it is? When we see jewelry in real life being held up to a camera that closely or being so center in the frame, all we can think of is an advert for jewelry. It
Yeah.
is a naturally weird thing to see in a TV show. And I think one of the things that happens is once they're on someone's hand, they just look better because I can't even think of a good metaphor, but a ring without a hand, it does just look odd just sitting there, and you do start to judge it aesthetically in a slightly, it just doesn't. You're not seeing the full picture, I guess. But with that, we do need to talk about the fact, oh my god, King Durin's getting a ring, which means they're going with the version of the story from the appendices where one of the dwarven rings, at least, is given out pre-sack for Eregion. So does this mean that Sauron, in his Annatar form, is going to travel with Celebrimbor to Khazad-dum, and that is how he's going to get the ring? Is that also how a Palantir ends up in Khazad-dum as another gift from the Lord of Gifts? Just putting it out there, could be. We don't know what they're doing with the Palantir. Also, we then get that shot of King Durin, like I said, with the axe and with the ring from behind the scenes. And if you look in the background, there's a mound of treasure on the floor. There's gold, coins, plates, bowls, cups. And I think what we're going to see this season, because we're not going to see the distribution of the 9 rings for the men yet, but what we are going to see is what happens when one of the mortal races get a ring. And it's this Tolkienian idea that the ring doesn't give you super strength or magical powers. It enhances that which you desire most. And in the dwarves, it was this desire to mine deeper, to enrich themselves, to craft more things, all these kind of things that we associate with the dwarves, their deepest desire. And so I think in this season, that's why, as we've already talked about, we're going to see the king get a ring. We're going to see him suddenly have a change of heart about a very aggressive mining and expansion and exploration program for the dwarves. And we're probably going to see him become even more distant from his son. And so when word comes of Eregion being in danger, That's why the king isn't going to be interested in helping. And that is why Durin is going to have to give this speech and marshal his own troops and go to help. Because I think we're really going to see how awful the influence of one of these lesser rings of power is on someone else.
I agree. I think I'm going to really quickly touch on your point about Annatar, and if he will have any kind of dealings with the dwarves directly. And I think that would be very interesting. I mean, it would certainly explain away the Palantir coming into Deeza's possession. I don't really know how else they would do that unless it just kind of appears. I don't know how they're going to do that. But it would be quite interesting to see an outsider's perspective of Annatar, specifically the relationship between him and Celebrimbor, whether the dwarves would be able to kind of sense that something's not quite right here. We'd have maybe Durin, who's too excited about the prospect of getting this ring that he's almost in the same park as Celebrimbor, where he doesn't care. He wants the ring. That's all he cares about. Whether it's maybe Prince Durin and Deeza, who are a bit more skeptical of him. Anyway, we might not even get them interacting, but...
Or what if, just to throw this in there for you as well, we talked about this on the Host Season 2, if they do include Na'vi in Season 2, we talked about this idea of Na'vi being the better angel on Celebrimbor's shoulders. So what if Na'vi is the one who meets Annatar and he immediately gets the bad vibes? And the thing I think that's interesting as well is, and we kind of talked about this on Twitter about the costume design, we don't know what costume Annatar is going to be wearing when he first appears. What if there are some homages to Aule, the Valar, who obviously initially created the dwarves in a kind of messed up way, but he did it, and they worship him as their kind of forefather and god. And so obviously we know Sauron, before his fall, he was apprenticed he studied under Aule. So what if that's Annatar's way in with the dwarves? If he says, I too am a student, a follower of Aule, but it's Na'vi who kind of just gets the sense that something's wrong. Or like you say, it could be Prince Durin. We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Adar said it best in the trailer. He finds the one thing to latch onto, and
no,
then...
say what he said. Say what he said.
I'm not going to say it. I can't.
He worms his way inside your mind, and then the rest of him slithers in. You're welcome, listeners, for that bit of lovely ASMR. I'll be here all evening. Sorry, carry on, Anna.
Moving swiftly on. Yeah, I think that there's many ways that they could do that, and it would be interesting to see if he does travel to Khazad-dum himself. I think King Durin even, well, he's going to be very interesting this season. And, it's a very interesting plot point for the dwarves. I mean, Saruman says it to Gandalf, before the Fellowship go to the Mines of Moria, the dwarves delved too greedily and too deep, and that's how they awoke the Balrog. So naturally, that is obviously the effect that the ring is going to have. And I wonder if it'll almost kind of flip the dynamic between the prince and the king on its head. Because in Season 1, we obviously had Prince Durin, who wanted to dig deeper for the Mithril. And that was where the kind of first tensions arose between him and his father. But I wonder if that almost kind of flips it on its head in this season, and we see King Durin going down this path of he just wants more and more, and he wants to go deeper and deeper. And I wonder whether that makes Prince Durin in turn kind of step back from that. And, we'll have Deeza, who potentially might see the fall of Khazad-dum, and she probably realizes that it's going to be because of that continued greed. So I wonder if it just kind of flips that entire dynamic on its head, which would be quite interesting to see, and it would make quite a good arc for Prince Durin from Season 1.
I agree. Like I said, I think Khazad-dum will be a little bit like Númenor, and that will take a little bit of a backseat, but I actually think it might be either as prominent as Númenor, or even more so, because if they are following this kind of very set structure of Season 1 was 3 rings for the elves, Season 2, 7 for the dwarves, there was quite a lot of Khazad-dum stuff between the trailer and the behind the scenes. So I think people should be ready to have Khazad-dum maybe be the second or third most important plot. I think it's really possible. So we'll have to see on that. Anything else you want to say about Khazad-dum before we move on to our final story?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think there was too much to cover in the first place, but I think we've kind of covered everything. We managed to mention Bear, so maybe just kind of say that I'm very excited for the Rings of Power Season 2 soundtrack. Actually, the first track that I ever listened to from the show in general was the Khazad-dum theme in Season 1. I don't know how he will ever ever be able to improve upon that, because he perfectly captured the essence of it to me. But I'm so excited to see how he goes, because we've had these character themes and these location themes from him in season 1. I'm very excited to see how the themes develop with the characters and with the locations, because there's so much change and there's so much turmoil. So it's very cool to see, I think, how those themes will develop as well.
I mean, let me throw a few ideas your way of what we might get just to get people excited. We got the Elrond theme in season 1 that is like Disney vibes, Disney Prince vibes. Now imagine that theme but turned into a battle heroic theme. We got the Khazad-dum theme in season 1, which is majestical and awesome, and we got the Durin theme, which is slightly more playful. Imagine that with a battle theme. We got the Sauron theme in season 1. Imagine an angelic version of that includes parts of the Valinor motif from season 1. Like, Bear be cooking. We don't know what he's cooking, but he's cooking something.
Listen, I think my most anticipated thing, and I'm getting very ahead of myself because it absolutely will not be in this season, is when we finally get the mix of the Sauron theme and the Númenor theme.
Ooh,
that is when my life will peak, I think.
Yeah, it's all downhill after that. But no, you're right to bring it up. So much good music to look forward to, and Bear, I know you're not listening, but we are all so excited. So, on to our final plot point. Rhûn. There's very little to talk about here, and as we said at the start of the episode and then completely failed throughout, we're going to try not to do too much theorizing about things we didn't see in the trailer. But let's just say out loud what we saw in the trailer. We saw the stranger clearly in a sandy desert area. We see him with a kind of walking stick that he then uses to, looks like, summon another kind of sandstorm tornado that Nori then gets caught up in. We see a few more shots of the stranger in the behind the scenes where he's looking quite almost worn down, but I think that might be post that scene. We see Nori's actor, Markella Kavanagh, and she's very sweet and says how excited she is to be back for season 2. Now, here's the most interesting thing we see that's Rhûn connected, which is we get a brilliant shot, and I described it in the trailer recap about 3 hours ago as you're listening last night as we're talking now, of all the moths flying into the room, and then it looks like they're forming a cohesive shape, and then we get a shot of 2 hands surrounded by these moths, and we see vambraces, and we see a tunic or a robe of some kind, and let's be honest, we can just say it now, it looks identical to the clothes that the Mystics were wearing in season 1. Of course, they were banished into moths by the stranger at the end of season 1. The Mystics are back, and I have no idea what to expect, but Anna, are you excited to have the Mystics back?
I'm very excited. I think they were a very strong part of season 1 to me. They were very foreboding, and I really liked their interactions with the stranger. I mean, the final battle between them when they disintegrated into moths in the first place was just stunning. I think it was one of my favorite visual aspects of season 1. You know what? I did think they were gone for good. There wasn't a part of me that would have theorized that they'd be back. And I think just in general, the Rhûn plot is probably the one where I can't take many guesses on what's going to happen because I'm genuinely unsure. I had originally thought maybe they would interact with Sauron in some form or another in Rhûn. But the more we've talked about Sauron and the role he's playing in this season, I don't think that they will have time to do that, unless he's in Khazad-dum and Rhûn and Eregion and the Southlands all at once. I don't know how they would make that work.
Like I said, I think I made the joke in the last episode, he's Taylor Swift, he's got a private jet, he's just all over the place, he's racking up the air miles.
But yeah, so I originally thought that that's what they might kind of do there. I don't think that's the case anymore. What they are going to do there, I'm not too sure. They've been very, I want to say, secretive about Rhûn. I do feel like it might just be because it's probably the biggest new location, apart from, I'd say Eregion, not really. So probably the biggest new location that we have in this season, whether they just want it to be this kind of grand reveal. It's a brand new set. We've got like a whole swathe of brand new characters, I would assume, because the only established characters we have going in are the Stranger, Nori, and the Mystics. So it's very interesting to me whether they're being secretive about it or whether they just didn't have enough time really in the trailer to put that front and center. Um, it's quite sad because I was a Harfoot enjoyer in season one, and it does seem like we had absolutely no mention of the rest of the Harfoots that Nori and the Stranger left behind. So whether we are going to see them at all, not sure. We might see them at some point when we're kind of with the Southlanders. I don't know if they're going to kind of pop up at all. I do think the Harfoot storyline has kind of fully branched out into Nori and the Stranger. It's interesting that the Mystics have kind of followed them to Rhûn because we knew that they were going there in the first place. Their mission was to get the Stranger to Rhûn. So it's interesting because did they follow the Stranger and Nori there, or were they just there in the first place to kind of try and salvage their mission in any way that they could have, after they were defeated in season one? It could really go anywhere for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you brought up there. I think in terms of why the Mystics are there, my theory is I don't think they're following the Stranger back. I think that's where their spirits are almost going to be called back to. So I think it's going to be a case of the Mystics going back to where they were going to go to anyway, the Stranger going there because he's now decided this is where he must go. And so there's almost going to be, not an accidental, because obviously it's intentional in some ways, but there's going to be this showdown Mark II, whether they have a direct showdown or whether they just are kind of crossing paths in the same way. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit concerned about Rhûn, and I'll try and explain why. The stuff with the Mystics looks great. Think it's very cool. Glad they're back. Glad it's got this real creepy, mystical blood magic side. I'm worried about it because from what we've seen, Rhûn looks like a desert area with a well and then a sandy kind of temple. And I want Rhûn to feel like a civilization in the same way Númenor does, or Lindon does, or Eregion does. I don't want them to lean into like the Peter Jackson thing of like anyone who's east or south is basically nomad tribal people who are wandering around with their elephants, and it's just like, I just don't want them to do that. Now, I appreciate it's a big show and they've only got so much budget all the same, and maybe and listen, I'm trying to hold myself back because last season, we didn't see most of Númenor until like the third trailer. We just got that opening shot of them going into the city. But I want Rhûn to feel like a real place. And if the Stranger and Nori are going to spend more than one season there, fine. That's fine. Then we don't need to see all of Rhûn in this season. And maybe we're going to see more of it in season 3 because that's when Sauron's going to be distributing the rings. So we're going to meet Cumhal the Easterling. We're going to meet more of these men of the East and the South. That's fine. I'm just a little concerned at the moment. And I shouldn't be, because it's clearly from like 2 scenes we've seen footage. I shouldn't be concerned. But like my nerves are a little bit on edge about it. And like I said to you in our hopes for season 2, the number one thing I hope for this season is that all the plot lines feel connected. And I want that to continue. So
I mean, yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I originally thought, they might have some interactions with Sauron in Rhûn, because I couldn't really think of any other way to connect that specific plot line to kind of the rest of the show, because we've talked about it and we can kind of see how every other plot line we've talked about today can intersect with each other. That's fine. That's not a worry. It is Rhûn. It feels, the Harfoots last season, the biggest kind of complaint we heard about them was that they felt very far removed from the kind of overall plot. If you took out the Harfoot storyline, nothing else would have been affected. And I worry that that's going to be the same in this season. I don't want it to be, but I think, Númenor was very scaled back in the season 1 kind of promotions, but we did have that kind of wide shot, as you said, of it during the first teaser trailer. So we got that kind of introduction to it then. We don't have anything like that of Rhûn, but it's like you said, we don't know how long they're going to spend there. We literally have no idea what they're doing there. So it could just be that they're kind of just arriving there in those scenes. They're kind of very much on the outskirts and they've not gotten to the kind of the civilization properly yet. I don't know. It's like I said, I can't even like really theorize about this plot line because I'm just very, very unsure. It could go anywhere.
Yeah, it could go anywhere. It could go anywhere. And listen, I'm starting to worry that this podcast is going to end up being like 4 hours long. Anna and I have been recording 2 nights in a row. I can tell from Anna's face and from my voice that we are both probably at the end of our energy and our ability to discuss. But I think it's kind of fitting we don't spend too much time on Rhûn because, like we said at the start, we don't want to just sit here crafting theories based on nothing. So we're going to hold ourselves back. So we've covered Sauron, Eregion, Celebrimbor, the elves, we've covered Mordor, we've covered Isildur, Arondir, the Southlanders, we've covered Númenor, we've covered Khazad-dum, and now we've covered Rhûn. And with that, we have covered everything in the Season 2 trailer and the behind-the-scenes video. Anna, any final thoughts on this first bit of marketing we've got and these videos?
Listen, it was an incredible trailer, and I don't know if the trailer was just that good or if we just hadn't had content for so long, but we have managed to turn an almost 2-minute trailer into almost 7 hours of discussion. If you include the space that we reacted to on the day that it came out, which I don't know if that says more about us and the lives that we lead, or about the content that we were given. But listen, if your first 2-minute teaser trailer can inspire that much discussion, then you've done something right. And I think what we've seen from kind of people that we follow online and everything, there's a lot to be said about this trailer. They've listened to a lot of the kind of, I wouldn't say complaints about season 1, but they listened to what we liked about season 1, I think.
And especially really the marketing as well, I think.
Yeah, exactly. They know what we want now from the marketing. They've kind of learned from, maybe, I wouldn't say their mistakes, but some of the kind of downfalls of the season 1 marketing. They've learned what to do and what not to do. And I think they've really honed in on their vision that they want for season 2. That comes across very clearly in the trailer. And all in all, it's just an incredible start to this new kind of season of promotion. And I'm very excited to see where we go with it.
Me too. And I agree with you. I think it was a brilliant, we've said this already, but it was a brilliant trailer and such a smart move to do behind the scenes so that any plot lines they didn't cover in the trailer they could address. And just, one of the things we all love about the original Peter Jackson films and now this show is that the people who are involved love working on it and they love Tolkien, and it's just... It's a labor of love. It's a job, obviously, for a lot of these people, and I think that's what it should be. I'm very much in favor of people having their work treated like work and not being held to some absurd standard of fandom. But it is lovely to see the care and the passion and the craft. And like you said earlier, almost just that one shot of the artist first working on the miniature of the Statue of Fëanor and then seeing the full-scale Statue of Fëanor, and you just think, wow, what an amazing... when I interviewed Alex Dissenhoff, the cinematographer for season 1 for Charlotte Brandstrom's episode, and who will obviously be returning next season, he said making this, it's like a community art project. It's not one person, it's not 2 people, it's not the actors, it's the writers, it's everyone working together. And I think across the trailer and the behind the scenes, we saw that. Now, we don't know when we're going to get another trailer. Probably not for another month or so. It might not be until Comic-Con in July. We don't know. We're probably going to start getting more of the marketing we saw for season 1. So we'll probably get some interviews in a Variety or a Vanity Fair or another publication like that. We'll probably get some announcements of who the new cast are playing. We'll probably get video interviews with the cast at some point. Maybe not until Comic-Con, but those will happen. I will cover those when they come up. I'll try and do it in the old format of just quick 15-minute episodes because, as we've acknowledged, doing 7 hours of content on one trailer and video, plus the 3 hours we did about our hopes for season 2, it's a lot to do. So we won't be doing that all the time in future. But when we get something big, like another trailer or a huge announcement, I can guarantee... Well, I was about to say guarantee, but Anna, will you come back to the podcast to cover that with me?
I'm not going to lie. I think after 10 hours of speaking to you, I'm done. This is me checking out.
What the listeners don't know, because while I won't have edited out our very funny intro to this episode, I will have edited out the bit where I mispronounced Númenor. And Anna spent about 5 minutes unable to hold it together and I'm not going to say how I mispronounced it, but I did, and I did it badly. And it devolved into 5 minutes of me swearing and Anna taking the mick out of me. So, yeah. But seriously, will you please come back to the podcast?
I will come back. Listen, it's very rare that you find someone who will talk about the Rings of Power and Tolkien in general for 3 hours straight with you. So I do appreciate the chance to yap about it with you, and theorize with you. And listen, half of our theories may be wrong, and they probably are, but it's really fun just to sit down, get all our thoughts out, and then, it's nice to kind of have we have some kind of regular listeners. And listen, if you've got to this point in the episode,
You're
thank you.
insane. You're insane.
I don't know how you've done it, but thank you. And I love to hear the thoughts of our viewers, afterwards, if they agree with us, if they disagree with us. They have so much more to add to our thoughts that we don't even think of, because it is just the two of us. We can't think of everything.
No, and I think we try and, as we've shown, we try to take a light-hearted approach to this. Listen, there are other podcast, YouTube videos, accounts you follow on Twitter that will take a very cold, hard, clinical, analytical approach, and I think they do great work. We try and do a bit of that. We like to think we do some analysis, and we talk about the books, and we talk about the inspirations and the references, but we also try and have a little bit of fun here, which I think you will have definitely got from the first 20 minutes of this episode. But it is and always is a pleasure to have Anna on. And I have to thank Anna because, like I've mentioned during this podcast, we recorded an hour and a half on Sunday night when we had the time. We've now, looking at the clock, we've now spent 2 hours and 40 recording now. I'm somehow going to try and edit this episode so that it is less than 4 hours, because it's insane that we've talked for this long. But Anna, thank you so much. And listen, you'll be back on the podcast very soon, and I can't wait till we get to do this again.
Me too. Again, thank you for having me. It's nice to do this again after 18 months of kind of nothing. We said we talk in the off season. Obviously, we are very good friends, but to talk, shut up, to talk like this, and kind of, as I said, theorize, bounce off each other's ideas. It's very nice, and it takes up a lot of time, but it's time that I don't mind spending. I wouldn't, we get absolutely nothing out of this, except for just the joy of talking to each other about it. So that's the last nice thing I'm going to say. Thank you for having me on. And I'm very much looking forward to talking to you about the rest of the content we get this season.
Me too. And the last thing I'll leave with our listeners is that Anna has done the whole 2.5 hours recording while holding a Gollum plushie. And she can't stop me saying that. Goodbye, we go to the outro. And that, dear listeners, is the end of today's discussion with Anna. Once again, I have to say that if any of you made your way through that marathon of an episode, then you have my gratitude and my admiration. As always, it was a pleasure to be joined by Anna for this conversation, and I'm sure all you listeners will be eagerly awaiting her next appearance on the podcast, rather than having to listen to just my old voice. As I mentioned during the episode, we do expect that we'll start to see a gradual increase in marketing over the coming weeks and months. Whatever form that takes, whether it be the announcement of roles for our new cast members, interviews in the press, or even new sneak peeks at Season 2, you can be sure that I will be bringing you coverage of that in some of our classic short-form episodes. And who knows, maybe we'll bring some more guests on whilst we wait to discuss different aspects of the upcoming season. If you're somehow new to this podcast, make sure you subscribe on whichever podcast platform you prefer, so that you never miss an episode. As always, I would love to continue the discussion on Twitter, and you can find me there at Daily Rings of Power. But for today, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back very soon for even more discussion on the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Namarie.